and we're going to talk about web interactivity. I think this is interesting for about everybody, because it's really whenever you want to do something on the web, especially if it's something that's not like a standard blog or whatever, you almost always come into this discussion of, okay, how do I make this thing interactive? And then of course we all talk about, okay, scripting. So how do I scripting now? And we're going to show a very specific approach that's working now. I'm going to start with some of the basics, but then almost immediately we're going to switch to an approach that solves a bunch of problems that you will encounter later on. This is kind of difficult to grasp right now, maybe, because you haven't encountered those problems yet. So you'll have to believe me that there are some issues that you will encounter if you take the normal road that will be a problem later on, and we are already going to tackle these problems. But yeah, you sort of, I know I've especially had to go through this in my, as a web developer, and sort of face these problems myself, try to solve them, curse a lot, and then finally understand, oh, there's a system that I can use, there's a framework, and there's an approach that I can use that solves a bunch of these problems. But of course, if you're new to this, you've not encountered these problems yet, so you don't know why you necessarily need this. But you'll see that it's useful regardless, even without talking about problems or the issues that we're trying to solve. I think it's a good approach anyway. So what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to make a system or use a system where it becomes easy to make any kind of application that is different from just a blog that's just text or just something that's on the page. And eventually what we're going to do is make something that looks like this. So an own online tool where we can have our font that's described as these curves. And then we can take these points and we can move them around and basically make our own type. And then we can also change the grid here to make them bigger and smaller, and everything still works. So we can still drag things around and everything works. While we're doing that, so we're gradually building up to that with a kind of different approaches. We're going to make a small shop thing where you can order your own let type, so your own letters. So you type your name here. And then it's going to say, well, you have 3 letters. And then every time I type, I see I have how many letters. It calculates the total and it calculates shipping. So if I'm over 50, so for example, if I add another style, then shipping is free now and it's no longer calculated. Just to show you, like, and this happens in any kind of application that you make, that there's a lot of effects that happen. So if something changes here, it might have effect here, 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 here. So on all of these different places, regardless if you're making a shop or your own tool or maybe some interactive experience, all of these will have that effect where one thing changes something on multiple different places. And that's really what we're trying to tackle here. Yeah, and this is just a very basic thing just to get started, just to show you how we do that in Vue, how we work with lists and things like that. So there are a couple of key things to understand once we're working with scripting, and those are the things that I want to show you. Now, before we get started, there are 2 important resources. One is the GitHub repo that contains all of the code, and I'm going to show you this, and this is the one that you also need to have. So it's here. I'll also make it a bit bigger and text edit. Let's see. So github.com/fdb/web-interactivity-workshop. I'll also put it in chat for the people on Zoom.
Was the same like the Sunday email?
Yes, I'm not sure. What do I send in the email? Yes, that's the same one. Yeah. And then what you can do if you found this link is you can click this green code button, and you can do it with GitHub if you have that, but you can also just download the zip file. And the folder will be called Web Interactivity Workshop Master. And you can do whatever you want with that folder, probably put it on your desktop to work there. So I will open that in Visual Studio Code as well. So you really need that tool. I also recommended that, I think, in the email. And then here I'm going to open that folder. So if you have Visual Studio Code open and there's something open already, you can do File, Close Folder. You get to this screen, or if you don't see this screen, you can also do Help and then Welcome, and then you get this screen. And then you do Open Folder, and then you select the folder, which in my case is in Desktop. Oh my God. And then Web Interactivity Workshop. Right. And so the way that that's split up, or the way that that's made inside of, or the way that I structured this, is that for every project you have a start and an end, or end and start sorted alphabetically. So the start project is always where we're going to start from, and the end project is then where we end up. If you open up index.html, which is at the bottom here, right before README, you see this is just an overview of all the pages. You can now open that in Live Server. You can right click. I actually learned that from a student. You can right click here and do Open with Live Server. Thanks, Indra. And then you see an overview of all the projects. So this is the page basically where you can see all of the projects. These are the ends of the projects, right? So these are already showing you the final stage of that project. So what we're going to do. So you can play around with the font editor if you want. Everything's interactive. Is this working for everybody?
Yes.
Another important resource, and that's also on the GitHub page. And so the GitHub page refers to the README. So the README is also inside of the project, is the designs for each of these projects. So that's also a page that we should have open, not for the first project, but after that will be really important. So on the GitHub page, you see here designs for this app are in Figma. If you click there, you should be able to see my Figma. It's going to look a bit different without the bar here at the top, and it shows you one of the projects. But what you can do here is click and hold here and then choose another one like shop, which is the shop page, or the editor, which is the editor one. Yeah, unfortunately I see. So if you're logged in, I think you can see the editor tools, because those are actually the ones that we want to see. Because those, I'm not sure if you see that if you're logged in as another account, but these are really useful because they show you the structure of the page. So for example, for this project, they show that I have a header, the thumbs, so that's the glyphs here, the preview, and then the style buttons here at the bottom. And it also shows you the dimensions of each of these elements. So it says, oh, this is 50 pixels, this is 75, and so forth. So I'll constantly keep referring back to the Figma when we're making a design. So for all the projects, again, except for the first one, the way that I made these things is I started out with a Figma skeleton or a Figma mockup that I built, and then I implemented that in code with VS Code. So it's a little bit practice what you preach. So I really started out from the design that I made first. And actually the first thing that I did here was make a color palette with these gradients, which is something that I learned from Tailwind, or there's a good UX book, Refactoring UI. That's really about making UIs in on the web. And this is a really interesting book that talks about this one, that talks about how you can make a good UI on the web. And I learned their approach for doing colors, like these palettes. I learned from them because I have these gradients, right? Okay, maybe I'm a bit carried away, but we'll talk about that a bit later. So those are really important to set up, which is first, make sure that you have the live server so that you see your index page, and then have Figma open as well. All right. Nee. Ah, yeah. Nee, yeah. I'll walk you through that as well. So I'll also show you where I'm working, which part I'm coding. I'm just going to go from top to bottom when I'm doing these designs. Okay, so if you first have to check that you have that extension installed. So in Visual Studio Code, wait, I'll make a light version so you can see it better. In Visual Studio Code here, I click this extension icon, which is this one, and then I type live server. And then here I can click install. And if you have that, you can go to your page, like an HTML page. And then there's a bunch of options. So the quickest one that I found is right click or control click and then do open with live server. But there's also an option here on the bottom where it says go live. And then finally in Vue, there's the command palette, which is just all the commands in your whole Visual Studio Code. And then here you can also do open with live server. This is what I used to do before I learned a shortcut for my student. Is it working on this? All right. So we're going to start with nothing, basically. We're going to open this view hello start and then click on the index page. And as you can see, this is completely empty. It's because the first skeleton or the first page, I just really want to start with nothing. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a couple of elements that we can access without actually using any frameworks or any systems. You see that I referred to Vue here a couple of times, but I didn't actually explain or talk about that yet. We'll come to that in a minute. But first I want to show you that all of these things we can also just do directly in the browser immediately. So in our index.html page, which is in Vue hello start, what we're going to do is we're going to remove that comment here. And then we're going to type an exclamation mark and then press enter to give that basic document from Emmet. So again, this should be familiar, I think, to most, but if you type exclamation mark, you press enter, and then you see the page here. Let me quickly check. Yeah. And then in our document, what we can do is we want to basically do a greeting here. So we want to type H1 and then type hello. I'm going to type hello. Now I want to see this page instead of the page, the index page that I have open, just to verify that this page is working. And so the way that I would do this is, well, there's a couple of ways. So I can do open with live server again. That's going to stop the server and start it. But in this case, what I really want to do is for you to understand that you can also just change the URL, because this is the index.html page, which is the one that we see in the browser. But if we change the URL here to the directory that we're in, which is view-hello-start/index.html, we're actually seeing the correct page, right? So this is the name of the directory, exactly as we see here. So this maps one-to-one with the files that we have on our computer. So Michelle, I see you watching the screen, but really think about what we're trying to do here, which is just go to that directory and make sure that we have that here, right? All right. I don't have very much here, but what I want to do is basically insert a name here. So here in this part, what I want to do is I want it to be this dynamic. So the name comes from somewhere. We're not going to really think about where that name comes from, but we're just going to imagine that we have a name coming from somewhere, like a database or something. So we're logged in and we want to see this name. But we don't know it yet the moment that we create our page. So this is our dynamic page here. So how do we do that? Well, we can't write your name here. We can't write Frederick here because we don't know the name yet. So we have to do something maybe like your name. I don't know. Hello, your name. And then we have to find that in the document and look it up. Now, this is really complicated. Now we're making it difficult for ourselves. So we're not really going to do this. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make an element that we're going to replace. So we leave this hello here, but inside we're going to write a span with a name. So let's write class equals name. And then inside here comes your name. So it should look exactly as it did before, only it says hello, your name. But as we see here, there's a span now, an element around that element here. Yep. Is that goed, Sophie? All right, so now what's also useful in Chrome is to open the developer tool to actually check out our page. I'm going to make these bigger as well. And then here I can see I have the body, I have this h1, and then you see I have inside of this h1, I have hello, comma, then the span with class your name, and then the exclamation mark. Now, maybe people already know this. If I want to change this element, what do I have to do in the page? There are a couple of people who've already done this with scripting in the past, but maybe it's a bit far away. See people raking their brains. Okay, I'll ask a different question. If we want to style this element, how do we want to style this? How can we style this in CSS? How can we access this specific element in CSS? Yes, with just writing name, dot name. So if we write a style tag here and we write dot name and we say color red, for example, we see this name in red, right? Or if we write font weight bold, that name will be bold and the rest won't. Well, bold actually doesn't work because the H1 is also bold. Right, so we can refer to the elements by selecting them on the page using a dot in front here. Right, so this, because we gave this thing a class, we can refer to it with a dot. If this doesn't have a class, but this has an ID, like ID equals name, it won't work anymore. Do you know what we have to do here then to change that? How do we refer to it then? Yeah, with a hashtag. So if we don't have a class, but instead we have an ID, so ID equals name, we just write hashtag name like this. Right, and if we don't have anything, so no ID, no class, how do we refer to it then? Yeah, so we can just refer to span. Now, this becomes problematic the moment that we have a span somewhere else in our page. This is indeed the way that we do this. So there's three ways to select. One is just by tag name, which is just the name of the tag itself. So H1, for example, would refer to the entire H1, or span would refer to these two spans, both this one and this one. They're both spans. And then if we have to be more specific, we can refer to these by giving it a name, like a class. And then we can do dot name to refer to just this element. Or if this is an ID, we can refer to this as with a hashtag and refer to that as well. Okay. Why am I saying this? Well, because actually in JavaScript, it's the same thing. So here in our body, what we're going to do is add a script tag. So just write script and then tab. And what we're going to do now is in that side of that script tag, so we'll give ourselves a bit of room, is we're going to select that element. So we're going to select that element that is your name. And here, note that I use ID now. If you have something else here, if you have some class, you probably want to do the same thing as I'm doing, which is we refer to it by ID. And now we can look at that element, we can select that element the way that we select elements in JavaScript or in CSS, which is in using this dot or hashtag or nothing if it's just a tag. So we do document dot query selector, and the information is a bit on top here, but you can see that we get an autocomplete message here, query selector. And then we open brackets, and now we type a string and we search for what we want to search for. So in this case, because we're referring to it by ID name, we do the same as in JavaScript, in CSS, we do hashtag name. So now we have a reference to that same element on the DOM. We can do something with that reference. So we can, for example, we can change something on that reference. We can change a style, or we can add an event as we click on it or something, or we can change its contents. We can also hold a reference to it. So we can refer to that reference in what's called a variable. So we can store that name with a variable. So we're going to say const name element equals document query selector name. I've said this a couple of times, but this one, so this is how you create a variable in JavaScript. In this case, actually a constant, because we can never change it again anymore. It's always going to refer to this specific element. This name is something that we choose, right? The name element. If you're confused about this, you can also give them Dutch names, so it's kind of clear the browser doesn't know what it's talking about. But this is a name that we choose for ourselves. It's good to be a descriptive here to know what we're referring to. In this case, I use the word name element because maybe above that, I also want to have the actual name. So the name equals Frederick, for example. That's the name that I want to put inside of that name element. So this is the name. So I get that information from somewhere. We're not going to deal with where that comes from, but you can imagine that you get this from like a database or something. If you have like a personalized website. And a name element, that item is actually referring to this element on the page. So now we have two variables, but we don't do anything with them. So if we save our document, you'll see that there's no influence on our name. And that's because we're just holding these references to these elements on the page in the brain, in the computer's memory, but we don't do anything with them. So one thing that we can do with them is console log them. So we can type console.log name element.
Can I interrupt for a second? There's this girl, Indra van Doren, and she wants to get into the Zoom meeting, but she hasn't received the mail with the right link. So
okay.
she can get in.
Sure. I mailed you yesterday.
Yeah, but that Zoom meeting wasn't working. So
okay.
So there was another link, but she hasn't received it.
Thanks for letting me know. So now I have to check. Give me a second. Stop sharing. Copy the link here. Share. Okay, thanks for letting me know, Ines. All right. Okay, something went wrong. So, well, okay, now it works. Ja, er was blijkbaar iets fout, Indra, sorry.
Ja, inderdaad. Ja, maar ben ik nu. Merci.
Okay, so heel snel voor jou ook. So very quickly, what we did is we opened the link that is in the Zoom chat. I'm not sure if you're able to view previous chats, but this is
Yes.
this link to GitHub. No, wait. This link to GitHub. There you can click code, download zip.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can take that folder, move it to your desktop, and then open that in Visual Studio Code using file open. Select that folder. And then what I did is I start live server. Basically what I made is in this, I searched for this folder, view hello start, and I made an index.html file. And this is the one that we're making ourselves.
Okay. Perfect. I'll do
And I
it.
didn't type all of this by hand. What I did first is just write an exclamation mark, enter, and that gives me already the basics of the page.
Okay, perfect. I'll try that.
Yeah. Right, so we were logging the name element. So what does that do? That actually, if you look at the console here, so if you open the developer tools and you look at the console, you see that it's logging this element. And if we hover over that in Chrome, you can see that this is the element that we are actually selecting. So we know that this is the correct element. Why am I just constantly talking about this? Well, it's really important because especially with console log debugging, as they're called, this is a way to verify that we are actually selecting the right element. If this has something else, and this happens a lot, for example, if this has a dot, for example, this element doesn't exist here, right? So if we now save, you see that the element that we get back is not the actual element, but is the word null. So this is a very tiny word that's easy to ignore, but in this case, it's really wrong. It shows that what we are expecting to get back is not what we're actually getting back. And a lot of programming that we do is actually, or a lot of debugging is actually talking about, okay, what's our hypothesis? What do we expect to get back? And then verifying that and then checking, okay, are we actually getting that back? In this case, no. And now we have to fix that bug, right? So in this case, it's actually helping us. It's saying, well, this console log comes from line 21, which is this console log line. So we know that this is the output that we're expecting, but we're not getting the right output. And of course, there's a bunch of ways to fix that. We can say, well, it has to be a class, which means that this needs to be a class. And then also this needs to be a class. Or we can all change them to IDs and make sure that this then is now a hashtag. And then here we verify again that now the element that we selected is actually that span element. Because afterwards, we're going to do something with that element. And if we are trying to do something on an element that doesn't exist, then we get into trouble. So here, what we need to do is actually change that name element. So we can type name element dot, and now there's a whole bunch of things that we can do with that element, right? So we have an option to select an element on the page, and this is an element, whatever element that we want from our page. And now we can say name element dot, and what we specifically want to do in this case is change the content. So there's text content, which is really what it says. We can change the content of the text. So here we can type, we're just now going to type a string here, like Frederick, for example. Maybe I'll use a different name here, just to show you what happens later if we use that name variable here. And what should happen is that we now replace your name with the name that we typed here in text content, right? So a lot of the JavaScript that we're writing when we're making these pages is really about taking elements that are on the page and changing their contents, or as we'll see in a minute, making new elements from scratch, from nowhere, making new elements and then filling those elements in. For example, if you have a dynamic gallery page, like a photo gallery, you take in data from a database with all the images from the gallery, and then you create new elements based on that gallery.
For some reason it's not really working. Yeah.
So we can also use that name that we had here, where we just say text content equals name. What happens then is it takes the output of, or whatever is inside of that variable, which is called name, and then places that as the text content. And of course, then if we change it here, then we'll see that it changes here, right? Wait, so if you type name like this with quotes around it, then there will be names. So there's a big difference. If the quotes actually mean a string, so it means that it's text, literal text, so the text that you want to see. If you write it like this, it becomes an expression, and JavaScript tries to evaluate that expression. It tries to figure out, okay, what is name in this context, and then show you that. I'm also going to show what happens if things go wrong. So what happens if we don't have the correct reference like we did before. So if this becomes written like this, or we actually have a hashtag, but then we write something else like name, like it's written wrong or something. What we see here is a very common error where it says uncaught type error, cannot set property text content of null. I want you to reproduce this error. I also want you to get this error as well. And so the way that I got this error is by having here the wrong text query selector. So I'm selecting an element that doesn't exist, which means that name element at this point is null. So it's not available. What this error is saying me is, well, you try to access a property called text content on an item that is null. So we were expecting that to happen on an element that's actually a part of the page, but we don't have an element that's part of the page. We just have this null, and null is basically the concept in JavaScript for nothing. So we're trying to, basically what we're writing is this null.text content. And of course that doesn't work because null doesn't have any properties or items or nothing useful that we can do with it. So this is a very common error. It shows up on line 22, which is this line, because this is the line that we have a problem with. Now, this is really important because this line is not actually the problem. A lot of times when we're writing code, the problem will have occurred before we actually encounter the problem itself or the error itself. So in this case, there's nothing that we can keep staring at this line, but there's nothing wrong with this line. We really have to verify that the things that we're referring to are wrong. And there's two things that can go, well, there's three things that can go wrong with this line. Another thing that we can have, so I'll fix this bug by replacing this with name. So now I'm looking at the right element, I'm logging the right element. Name element is now set to my page element, and now I can refer to text content. But this can also happen if, for example, this is wrong. So I spelled it wrong here. Again, this line is completely correct. And now it's just going to say hello, comma, and then nothing. This is a common error as well, or bug as well, because now there's no error. There's nothing wrong actually with our page, but we don't see anything. We don't get the desired result. If we go look at our span, we will see that the span is now empty. And that's also here something that we have to verify, or we can verify. So instead of, so we are also going to log name like this. And now look at the console. And now we see that the name element is actually the content that we have on this thing, which is just completely empty, which means that name here is actually what's called undefined or non-existent, which means it's empty. So there's nothing in there. And so the text content of name element is then going to be replaced with nothing, which means literally that we're going to do this in our page. So our element will be replaced with nothing. So here as well, we can verify that the element that we want, that we place here, that actually contains the right content. So in this case, to replace this with the correct variable. So console log is really, really useful as a way to debug our elements, and because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Another thing that can happen, and also doesn't give an error, unfortunately, in JavaScript, is that we can refer to a property that doesn't exist, like text content, or for example, more common is that we write it like this, which we can, again, stare on forever because it looks correct, it feels correct, we can even Google it, and it's going to say, well, text content indeed exists. But we forgot that we have to have this middle letter, so this C has to be in an uppercase. And again, now nothing happens. So what's going on here? Why don't we see anything? Well, what JavaScript now actually does is it's going to add a new property that it doesn't know about called text content with a lower c. It's going to add that property to our document, but our page element doesn't react to it. So it doesn't do anything with it, but we can add arbitrary properties to our elements. This is very, very difficult to find because yeah, it looks correct and it doesn't give an error. But I want to show you all of these cases because they will pop up frequently whenever we try to do something with our page. All right, so enough about that name. Now we want to do is also create a button here. So we're going to make a button. We're also going to give it an ID, and we'll call it pop-up button. And then we're going to call show alert. This is totally unrelated. It can go away. That's not really important. So what we want to happen here is basically we want an event to trigger. So the moment that we click our button, we want to show an alert on screen. So remember, we have these lines here. We have this button here. We don't have that much code yet. So what do we do if we want to have something happen with that button? What's the first thing that we need to do?
Make a const with name elements.
Yeah, just make a const. All right, that's good. Well, the name should probably not be name element because we already have that name. Yeah, button element might be a good one. And then what do we do with that after that? Click on the button. Yeah, it would be cool if we could just shout that to the computer really hard and then it will work. But that doesn't really work. So there's two things that we have to do. And the first one we already did, which is to select that button. We have to select that button from the DOM so we have access to it. So we have to write here const button element. The reason why I call them elements is that's actually the correct term. We probably know them as tags, but there's a distinction that the browser makes between elements and tags. A tag is this, but an element is this and this. So the whole thing, also with the things inside, that's an element. That's why I call them elements. But if you're confused with that, you can also just call them tag. So let's call them button tag just to be not so crazy about them. And then say document query selector. And now how do we select that button?
By using the hashtag.
Yeah, so exactly the name that we gave here. Remember, we can choose these names, right? So it's up to us to define a name that we do here, and then you refer to that same name here. Okay, we can also, if we want, print out button tag to make sure that we are actually referring to the correct thing. So I make a habit out of that, especially if I'm writing a lot of new code, to make sure that I actually get that button tag the way that I want. So again, verify that here in JavaScript, it says, this is the button. And you can, if you hover over that, you see that the button is highlighted. That's a good indication that we're actually referring to the right element. Yes, yes, indeed. So that was my point. The correct term is button element, but again, this can be anything, right? This can also, you can also call it names of the Simpsons or something. Like, it doesn't really matter as long as the names make sense to you. What I often like to do, because I'm tired of typing button element, is I write a $sign in front, button. And then for me, I know, and this is not something that I use, but there's a number of people that do this. This is a way that I know that this is referring to an element that's on the page, not a variable that's in my code. But if you're confused by that, this is just a naming convention, right? So you don't have to do that. Sometimes I just call button L for short for element. All of these are just ways, especially if you're just working by yourself, there are ways not to get confused. And I think not just calling it button makes sense. And especially, and you see it here, if I would call this name, I would get confused with, is this the actual name of the person, or is this the element on the page that actually contains that name, that's actually showing that name? There's a big distinction between the two. That's why I want to make sure that that's clear. All right, and then we can add what's called an event listener to that. So we can write button L dot add event listener. Again, let JavaScript do the work here. So this is the name that we have to do, and JavaScript will auto-complete that. And now it needs two parameters for that. The first one is which event are we going to listen to? And there's a bunch that the browser gives you automatically, and you have to respond to these events. So one of the main ones for buttons especially is clicking. So I can write click here. But there's also events for when you enter with your mouse, for you leave with your mouse, when you're moving your mouse around on the element. There's touch events, so that happens only on the browsers. There's a resize event when you resize the window. That doesn't work on buttons, but it works on the whole window. There's keyboard events when you type something in a field, for example. If you want to verify that a credit card is filled in correctly, you can do keyboard events. So there's, or if you use a game, for example, you can also use keyboard events to make sure that somebody's pressing the right arrow key, so now our spaceship is moving to the right or something. So those are all events that happen in the browser, and we can listen to them. So we have an event listener. That's the way that the browser calls these. So an event listener is the event is triggering into the event system of the browser. The events are everything that happens in the browser. So the browser is constantly firing these events, but nobody's listening to them. And by doing this, we can actually listen to them. And now what we have to do is actually respond to that event. So the next parameter is a function that is going to be called only when that event happens. And there's a couple of ways that we can write functions, but I'll write the most common way that we see now, which is this really weird syntax, which starts with two brackets like this, or two parentheses. And then we have what's called a fat arrow, which is just an equal sign and then a bigger one, bigger than sign. And then we open curly braces. So it's just a fest of brackets all around. And then what I like to do is inside of here, I just press enter to give myself some room. So I'll let you type that, make sure that you have all the right brackets here. And then I press enter. And then inside of here, I can write code that only gets executed the moment that I click that button. And this is a really important distinction because this code, the main code that I see, all of this code, and actually this line as well, all of this code is actually executed the moment that the page is loaded. Now, the reason why I put this script at the end and not at the top is because it executes the moment that you encounter the script. So if I would put this script here at the top, so right above the H1, for example, it will give problems because it's executing this script, but it hasn't loaded these elements yet. So if I'm looking for a query selector name, at that point in my document, this part of the document doesn't actually exist yet. So it can't find that name element because it's not there. So that's why I put the script always at the bottom of my page, like this. Right, and then inside of here, inside of that click, we can do something. So here we want to write an alert, and then we can write stop clicking. Note that I often also use single quotes. They're exactly the same as double quotes. And if I use prettier, they will also automatically be converted. So single and double quotes in JavaScript are exactly the same. And then if I click this, I should get an alert here. So alert is something that's built into the browser that shows this little pop-up box. All right, does this work for everybody? Yeah. So we can also call this other code, and I'll show that as well. So this code, as I said before, executes automatically when we open our page, but we can cut out this code and then here place it instead of the alert, which means that it goes here. So I'll make it clear just by pressing some enters. So you can see this code is now inside of that event listener. So this function only gets executed when we click that button. So what happens now, and we probably should change this your name then to stranger or something, is that the moment that we load our page, it says hello stranger. And now if we click that button, it's going to replace that name with the name that we have set here. right? No? So make sure that your code that we just did is inside of that event listener. So we are inside of that event listener. First thing that we do is we make a name, we select our name element, and then we set a text content to that name here. Yeah, so the alert is no longer here, so it's not showing that. Yeah. Kato? Ça va? Ja, heb je de developer tools openstaan? Komt er iets van foutboodschap? Ook niet eens geklikt? Want nu moeten we dus op de knop klikken voordat er iets gebeurt. Hè?
Vanaf nu weet ik dat ik weer blijf doen.
Ja. Ja, dat is wat er gebeurt. Dus deze pagina staat eigenlijk klaar. Hè? Ik heb er dan Hello Stranger van gemaakt. En dus nu selecteer ik de button en ik voeg op die button event listener. En dan enkel dan, als ik op die button klik, dan worden die dingen uitgevoerd. Okay, one more thing and then we're going to move to view land. All right, so one more thing that we want to do here is we want to get this thing back out to our event listener. So put that on top of our button element. Again, you have to get comfortable a little bit with moving elements around and just putting them the place where we want. So now it executes immediately. You'll also see that Prettier sort of cleans up this code and sort of pushes it into one line, which is fine, but we want to do something with our button. I actually have an image ready and I want to show that image here. So I'm going to write image here. Oh yeah, I'll first verify that indeed it says hello and then your name here again, and that there's no errors, right? If there's any errors, then please let me know.
So the inside of the button element we delete? Or?
Yeah, no, we don't delete it, but we moved it here. Yeah. So it's back on top. And then inside here in our click, what we need to do, or what we want to do, and that's what we do with the view hello end. It's a bit different here, is that we see this cat here, and then when we hover over that image, we want to see a different cat. Yeah, I know, it's cute overload. So it's not actually, well, we're doing a part in Vue, but here we're going to do it with a button just to make it a bit easier for ourselves. We're going to make an image tag here, image, and then we're going to refer to that image, which is conveniently already in a folder called images, and then there's cat sit.jpg, and that should show you the cat here. It's huge. Also, maybe I can set a width here of 150 just to make it a bit smaller, and add a break tag here. It's not the most beautiful page in the world, but yeah, it will work for now. And then instead of show alert, I probably should call the button like I'm bored or something, because we will have the cat yawning in a minute. So now, and that's actually the core of what I want to show. This also happens a lot. Now I don't want to change the content of a tag, but I want to change one of its attributes. So this is called an attribute on the tag. The image tag is actually empty. There's nothing inside. Like an H1, for example, it starts with a tag and it ends with a tag, but an image tag itself only has attributes. So it only has this information here. So the source, the alt, the alternate text, and then the width, they're all attributes of that tag. So what I want to happen here is that when I click the button, I want to have changed my image from cat.sit to cat.yawn. So now I can do this manually, of course, by typing it, but I want to do this in response to the button. Is it clear what I'm trying to do? Yeah. So I already have a way of selecting that button, right? That doesn't change. So I have this event listener, I click it. But now what happens here inside of the click event handler is a bit different. First, what do I need to do? What would be the first thing that I need to do if I want to change the image of the cat?
Place the other image somewhere.
Yes, but we like place it where? Like, can we just type place image here? Like, how do we refer to it?
Yeah. Maybe first you have to put it underneath the cat sit.
Ah, the image itself, you mean?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, so you have two images.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you flip them around or something, or you make one visible and the other hidden. Yeah, you can do that. In this case, we're going to do it differently. We really want to change the attribute here. We want to change the name of it.
First select the image.
Yes, so that's what we need to do. So we first need to select image. So we'll call it image L equals. And how do we select the image in this case?
Image.query selector.
Image.query selector? No, we always start from the document.
Ah,
So document query selector, and then what do we select? How do we select the image?
maybe give it an ID image. Or
Yeah. So yeah, there's multiple ways. So you can just refer to image. There's only one on the page, so that would work. But in larger projects, this will always fail because you have more than one image. Document query selector, if it encounters multiple ones, it's just going to select the first one. So if you change this page to have a logo on top, it will select that logo and then replace it with a yawning cat, which is not necessarily what we want. So it makes sense here in this case to give that an ID, like cat, and then refer to it with hashtag cat here as the way that we refer to that image, right? We can again console log to check that we are seeing that image. But remember, and this is really important, this code only executes when we click the button. So we won't see this console log until we click that button, right? This is really important because otherwise it doesn't work. Now, we can actually move this code outside of this event listener because our image element doesn't actually change. So we can just already have it ready to go, so that inside of the event listener, we just have to do the flipping of the image, but the selecting can happen before that. So it's actually already there. And now what happens is that we have a reference to the image without actually needing to click the button. Now we can select that element, and this is really important. As I said before, these are attributes on our element, on our tag. So now we can do set attribute, which basically means take a name of an attribute, like source here, for example, and change its value. So this is a function that takes two parameters. The first one is the name of the attribute that we want to change. And when we're changing the image URL, this is called src. So we are going to refer to that attribute src. And we're going to replace that with a new cat image. And for that, we need to check what the new image name is. So here in Vue, the name is not just cat yawn, but image img/cat yawn, just as we see here. So if you're confused with this, you can also just try it here and just copy this part, right? But this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to change something in the DOM as if it was always that way, right? So we're going to copy that and then replace it here. So this is a way to check. And then if we click the button now, we get the other image. And we can keep clicking it, but it will stay on this yawning cat because it doesn't change it back. All right. Yeah, it's not super spectacular yet what we're trying to do. Is this working for everybody? Yeah. All right. As you can see, there's a lot of code going on just to have these tiny little interactions on our page. And this is really what Vue is trying to solve. There's multiple things that Vue is trying to do, but one of them is to make everything just shorter. Another thing that's specifically about Vue and what I kind of like about it is that it can gradually build on top of an existing page. So you can make a page that already looks like an interactive page and then add interactivity just by adding little items to your HTML. And that's what we're going to do. So the final Vue end page, which we'll work against, looks a bit different. You'll see that the JavaScript here, there's actually much more going on here. The JavaScript here, or the way that the cat is flipping, is actually not doing query selecting at all. Instead, what it's doing is it's having these source attributes, but then it does it a bit differently. So you see you have this cat image, but it has this, instead of source, it has colon source. This is a way of Vue to refer to an element and basically say, well, this is a dynamic property. This comes from somewhere else. But we'll gradually work towards what we're trying to do here. So what I want you to do in the Vue hello start, if you want, you can keep this code and then just move that to another file. So you can rename that to, I don't know, old index or something, and then make a new one, because we really want to basically build this from scratch here. You can also just delete everything out, that's fine as well, if you're not too attached to the code. So I'm going to start with Emmett again with a blank document. And I'm going to steal a little bit of the index.html specifically. So in the Vue hello end, I want to steal a bit of the styling of the final page. So I'm going to copy everything from the style tag to the end style tag and place that after the title attribute here. So I have a little bit of styling code going on. Vue hello end en dan index.html. Heb je die gevonden? Niet heel de pagina, maar gewoon de style. Dus vanaf lijn 7 tot lijn 19. De rest gaan we met de hand schrijven. Alright, en dan werkt dat, Michel? Ja, we gaan nog niet veel zien natuurlijk. And then what we need to do for Vue, and this is important, is we need to give it a container or a place where it fits into the page. So oftentimes with Vue, and I'll do that in all of the applications, I'll start with a blank div, which is just called a div, with the name app, or the class app. It's not really necessary, but I like to do that, especially if I have multiple things on my page going on. This sometimes makes sense. For larger projects, I often get into trouble if I don't do this, because they add their own tracking code and advertisings, and then we get into problems. So this is basically a way of saying, okay, this part of the page is managed by Vue. But we'll get to that in a minute. And then for the greeting, what we want to do is we want to type hello, comma, and then write name like this. And what will happen if we open this Vue hello start is that we literally see what we typed here, right? So we see hello, and then these double brackets name. And this is Vue's way of referring to an element, or it's basically a way of templating or saying like this is a slot where something needs to be filled in, like an empty hole that needs to be filled, basically. But of course, nothing happens because we haven't loaded Vue yet and we haven't made our app. So this is just completely not doing anything at the moment. It's just having this text here, right? So to use Vue, I'm quickly going to show you the framework here, which is Vue.js. They're currently making a switch from version 2 to version 3, but everything we do is with version 3. So if you see this, you do click here for version 3, and then you see all the docs. There's actually a really, really good course that's also in the web interactivity thing. No, where did I put it? Ah, yeah, on Notion. So if you watch this video, why Vue.js?
Creating modern web apps.
We're not going to watch here, but you can watch the Vue Mastery's free Intro to Vue course, which I really recommend. It's really taking you step by step into everything that you can do with the framework, how it works. And a lot of these The way that we do the setup here actually comes from the Intro to Vue course. So a lot of it will feel familiar after you've done this workshop. But it really tries to show you like step by step what we're doing. And it's also making a fun app. So what are we going to do? The setup is a bit tricky, or there's many things going on, but once we have that, a lot of it will be much faster. So the first thing that we need to do is actually link to Vue.js. And there's a really easy way to do that, which is to make a script. And I'm going to write script src, like source, so this one. And then you see I have a script with source. So this links to an external script. It's a script that's not written directly inside of the app. And here I'm going to write https unpackage.com, which is unpkg.com/vue@next. And this is what I need to actually include the framework inside of my page. This is a link, you can follow that. And it's just a bunch of code that luckily we didn't have to write ourselves. That's the whole framework basically loading. So there's lots of stuff going on. And then at the end of our page, we're also going to make our own script, which is just going to be our app itself. So after this div class app, we're going to write script source again. And now we're going to link to the script that will contain our page. So we could do it like we did before in the old index. We could put all the code here inside of the page, but it's much neater to actually put it in a subpage. So we need to make that thing first. So here in Vue hello start, what I'm going to do is make a new folder called JS. And inside of that folder, make a new file called main.js. So on the file system, what it should look like is that we have our folder here, and then I made a folder JS, and then inside I made a file called main.js. That's my Vue. That's where all my code is going to be. So here in Vue hello start, and then I right click here and I choose new folder. That's going to make a JS folder, and then inside I make a file called main.js. Yeah. And then here I'm going to write some code. Okay, just to verify that this is in the right location, we're just going to console log saying loaded. And then that doesn't do anything because here in our index.html, we also need to write js/main.js. So this refers to that script. It's loading and immediately executing that script. And that script itself says loaded here. Okay, and then what needs to happen here in our document is that it's going to have two statements. First one is going to say you're running a development build of Vue. It will keep saying that. We'll keep ignoring that as well. And then after it says loaded here on main.js line 1. Right? If you don't see that, please let me know, because this is the way that we know that our Vue is loading. If this doesn't work, the rest won't work as well because it doesn't load the script. Again, we can remove this later, but this is a way to verify that our JavaScript is actually linked to our HTML. Michelle? This here at the bottom, I wrote this script tag that's referring to JS main.js. That is a file that's here in the JS folder, main.js, in that Vue hello start project. And then in main.js, I wrote just console log with whatever, and then I would see that here. Do you get that, Fee? Okay. Ja, dat is ook. Dus als het scherm breder is, dan komt dat. Dus ja. Ja, die layout is hier aangepast. Ja. Dat is die style die je hebt gekopieerd. Hè.
Nee, hoor, dat is echt de package.
All right, and this part, the creating a view part is a bit weird, especially in the beginning, but luckily it's always the same approach, so we can keep copy and pasting that. But the first one I want to do ourselves, which is we're going to make our app here. So we're going to write const app equals, and again, this app name is something that we choose ourselves, but it just makes sense. And now we write view with an uppercase V dot create app. So because we have loaded Vue in our browser now, we can access this new object, which is Vue, which is not in the browser by default. It's really something that we have to load externally. And then we open our brackets here, and we immediately also open curly brackets. And then there's a bunch of stuff that will come between. So here it makes sense to write enter, to have some room to actually write the rest of our app. And here the first thing that we need to do is provide data to the app. So we're going to write data, and then use, again, these parentheses like this, and then use curly brackets like this. Again, as I said before, lots of brackets, but yeah, and we're not done yet, because now we're going to write return, and write another set of brackets, and then we're done with writing brackets for a while, and then we write what we want to see in our page. So this is a whole bunch of brackets, but basically what we need to do here is for Vue is to get some data back from our apps. This is here we're going to list what the initial data is of our app and what is needed in our app. Well, the only thing that we refer to now is the name, and the name will be your name like this. So name colon and then the name that we want to see. Note that this doesn't do anything yet. We still have to mount the app as it's called in Vue, but we're almost there. So just to make sure that it's working, we're going to write this last line, which is const mounted app equals app.mount. And then we refer to that element that we made before, this div with the class app as .app. So this is like the query selector where we select the app and we say where the app needs to be in our page. And then what should happen is it will replace these double quotes here, these double brackets with the name that you set here. So here it says, hello, Frederick. That's what should happen. If that doesn't happen, and because you missed a bracket, then that's fine. You have to try again or verify that this is actually what you see.
Hello, Frederick.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
When do you use semicolons or commas in JavaScript, or at least in, yeah?
Yeah, that's kind of tricky. So the data here, the data thing that you see here is, so you see that it has a colon at the end. That's because this was actually sort of like a list. More of these things will follow. So not now, but in a minute, we'll also have, after data, we'll also have methods, for example. And it's basically saying that we have, the comma basically means there's more following. These ones basically mean this is the end of the statement. So the return is like the end of this statement returns. So we have a comma, a semicolon here. But if we would have more data, for example, like a cat image, I'm not sure, then we would write it here, and then we would need a comma here. And then if we have another one, we write a comma here. So writing a semicolon here is actually wrong because this would finish the statement. Whereas in this case, we actually have more things.
And after the curly brackets connected to the vehicle, there is a comma.
This one? Yeah, but this one gets added automatically with prettier.
Yeah, my prettier doesn't work in this file.
Oh yeah. What you can try to do, you can always do command palette and then format. And then it will, sometimes it says there's multiple formatters and then you can select prettier. Ja. Je zegt dan multiple formatters en dan kunnen prettier kiezen. En vanaf dan zou het wel moeten werken. Do you see your hello replaced with the thing here? Yeah. So this is kind of a lot of stuff going on, but actually if you look at the way that now we have the document, this is actually easier, especially if you have lots of things going on, because now instead of selecting the element, we can just refer to elements like this. So we can also do it another time. So here at the end, we can also write goodbye name. And this doesn't really make sense in this case, but you can imagine that if your element like name, for example, appears on a lot of places on the page, before what we needed to do is use document query selector on all of the elements and make sure that we don't forget one. Here we can just use these brackets to indicate that, okay, here's the name, here's the name, here's the name, and Vue.js will just immediately replace all the parts where it's needed. So in that sense, it's a bit easier to use. Right. Now, we also wanted to see the image of the cat here. And the way that I want to do that is I want to just make an image here. And the way that I do it is in Vue, and I'll do it in the other apps as well, is I just write the HTML that I would write anyway. So I write image source img/cat sit like this, and then maybe add an alt tag, sitting cat or cat. This is what I would normally write. So I remove the goodbye here. And then what we can do with Vue, and this is really key. So we show that we can replace elements with these curly braces. If we want to replace a attribute, remember we did that before in our old index using this set attribute like this. So if we want to do that here in Vue, we use, well, there's a long form and a short form. So don't type this yet, but you can write Vue bind : source. And that's basically going to bind that source attribute to something. So this now needs to be something that's stored inside of data. There's a short form, because this is used so much, is that we can just remove that Vue bind and we can just write : source. If we try to do it this way, Vue will complain at this point, because the image, this part, is no longer an image, but it actually needs to refer to an element as data. So that means, and now you can follow again, that after name, we can also write cat image. So we can also point to the image of the cat, which is an image / and then cat sit.jpg, which is the initial image. And then going back to Vue hello start. Wait, I'll put the two side by side so you can see better. So this is my JavaScript. This is what I added here. And then in the image here, I need to refer to cat image like this. Right, and so if this is a different image, you'll see that it replaces that in Vue. Right, so for attributes, so we don't need to write the curlies, as you can see, because Vue already knows that this part is actually a JavaScript expression that refers to a function or something else that's inside of Vue. Let's quickly check. Yeah. And then what we want to happen is that if we, with our mouse, if we move on that cat, then we actually see the yawning cat. That was the idea. So we want to have an event listener like before. We want to listen to an event that happens on the image. So before we use the button, but here we want to have that event happen on the image. And we don't want to click it, we just want to move our mouse inside. So the event is called mouse enter. And in Vue, we can use, again, there's a long form and a short form. The long form is Vue on : and then mouse enter. But the short form, which is what everybody uses, is just using an @ sign. So this basically means if this event happens, then we do something. And here there's a bunch of things that we can do. We can actually flip the image immediately ourselves. So we can write all of the code inside of that thing, and we'll do that now just to show you. So here we can literally say cat image equals, and now we have to use single quotes because we already have these double quotes around it. We can write image/cat yawn.jpg. So note here the use of single and double quotes. So we have our double quotes that are around this whole attribute, and then inside we say cat image equals, and then we use here single quotes to indicate that this is now the new cat image. So this is Vue immediately changing this data property and then figuring out, okay, now I have to refresh this part of the page. This cat image is now something else, so I have to replace that image. And so if we look at our page, we should see that if we hover over with our mouse, then we actually get a different image here. Zo even komen kijken. Of liever even komen kijken. Ah ja, zo, ja, dat is goed. Ja, inderdaad, als je responsive doet, dan mouse enter bestaat niet. Dus je moet dat afzetten.
Dus als je inspector sluit, doe je van je laat.
Yeah, so in responsive mode, so if you have this set up, then this is no longer, it's like your finger basically, and it's like your finger hovering over the image. So that doesn't have any effect. Mouse enter doesn't exist. So if you want to fix, you can also do click, I think. And now you can click the image, and that should work as well. But we wanted to do mouse enter. And then also we wanted to do mouse leave, of course. So we can do mouse leave equals, and then we just copy all of this. And now we say cat sit again. So when we enter, the cat becomes this cat yawn, and then when we leave, the cat becomes this sitting cat. It can be that if we save, everything drops below each other, which is easier to read. So again, this is prettier doing its job. You can also do this yourself, but this just becomes clearer what we're trying to do here. Again, I have to leave responsive mode. But now we can enter with our mouse, we see one image, and then we can leave, and then we see the other image. Is this working?
Yeah, I got it to work.
All right. And note that we are not actually changing the attribute. This is really important. So we can actually have multiple of these cat images all referring to the same one. So we can have another one and another one. And now if you hover over to the first one, they're all changing, right? Because they're all referring to this cat image. So before we had to select each element and change the attributes, but here we're really referring to a data element, and it's up to Vue to actually say where that element is used everywhere on the page. So this can happen in multiple places. This is really convenient. And as with the example of the shop that I showed, this is used a lot because changing an item, the price of an item or changing the amount changes everything on the page. It changes the total, it changes if we want shipping or not. So a lot of these things are compounding, or they have an effect on something else on the page. It's like snowballing, a snowballing effect on the rest of the page. And that's really what Vue is trying to solve here. And a lot of your things that you're going to build also have that inside of them. So I just want to leave with one image here, but I'm kind of annoyed with the fact that I have to write this mouse enter. I have to write basically all of the code inside of that thing here. It would be cooler if I can just write for mouse enter, I can just write flip cat. And then for mouse leave, I can also just write flip cat, and it's just going to flip between the two images, right? Now, of course, if I do this, then of course that doesn't work, where it says property flip cat was accessed during render, but is not defined on the instance. So I'm trying to refer to this flip cat thing, but Vue says correctly that this is not available. So what is this flip cat? Of course, I set this up a little bit to make sure that I can do this. Flipcat is actually a method on the app. So before I had data on the app, but I also want methods on the app. And methods are things that do something with the app. They change the app. For example, they load some data, or they save some data, or they change some data here. Note that they don't change an item on the page directly. Instead, they go through the data. So they change the data, and then Vue's responsibility is to change the actual page. I'll show that. So here, after data, we can also write methods. And note that the way that we write this, before we had these brackets here, is a bit different. So we write colon here, and then we do the brackets. This is, I think, the most annoying part about Vue, is that this almost, especially if you are new to JavaScript, almost feels like magic. So why are we doing it here this way, and why are we doing it this way? Yeah, I'm not going to go into detail about that, but that's really a Vue thing. And as I said before, that's maybe the most annoying thing. So methods is a list or a dictionary of names and then the functions. So in this case, I'm going to make that function, so flipcat, which is the way that I call it before. And I use these brackets and then open curlies again. And this is a method that doesn't take any parameters. And it's going to change that cat here. And so what it's going to do is basically it's want to change this cat image. And the way that we refer to it here in JavaScript is also with cat image, but we have to put this in front. And this refers to the app. So this, in this case, means this app, literally this app. This cat image equals, and now how do we flip it? Well, initially, because the first image is cat sit, we want to flip to cat yawn.jpg, right? So the first step is easy. If we flip the cat, we hover over it, and then that's going to change to that cat image, right? So that new cat image. That's easy because we are just replacing that with what we had before. But note that flipcat is called here when we enter and also when we leave. So how do we fix that it changes to the other image? Well, we have two functions. So either we can do, what we can do is we can write two functions here, but we want to do it in one function. So we're going to check first what the cat image is, and then based on that, we're going to change that. So we are going to use a condition, an if statement, to ask what the cat image is at this point, and then we're going to change it to the appropriate image. So we're going to, and so the big difference between these images is that one has the word sit in it and the other has the word yawn in it. So what we're going to do is look for, if the cat image has the word sit in it, then we're going to take the yawn image. If the cat image doesn't have the word sit in it, then we're going to replace it with the sitting cat, right? So it's basically flipping between the two states. So here we're going to ask if this.cat image, and then we write a typical JavaScript thing, because this is a string, we can ask it if it includes, so if it contains the word sit, then we write these brackets here. I'm going to delete this last bracket because this is the part that goes inside of the bracket here. So this is what I want to write. If this cat image includes sit, so if the current image includes the word sit, then I want to replace this with the yawning cat. And this still does the same thing as before, so I can hover over it, but it doesn't change again. But now what I can do is I can write else, so I can say, well, if that's not the case, so if the cat image doesn't include sit, that means that I'm looking at the yawning cat. And in that case, I can copy this line and I can say, now I want to flip back to the sitting cat. So hover over it, I get the yawning one, and now they go back here. So this is also a common way to figure out if we need to do one thing or the other based on a condition. This happens a lot. And note, and I think that's also important to note, is we could have written two methods here. We could have written one method like show yawning cat and one show sitting cat, right? That would work. But what happens if it's just one method? So if it's not mouse enter and mouse leave, but if it's just click, then of course we now have to click the image, but we don't know which state we're in until we check. So now it has to be one method that actually checks before what the current state is. So what is the current state of that cat image? And then we can, the click is going to respond to that. Right? So there's a bunch of other things in the Vue hello end that I'm not going to go through in detail. I'm not going to write, There's actually one big one here, but I'm just going to explain what we're doing here. And I'm going to show this so I can, here in the URL, type view hello end, look at the final one. And here there's one thing that's different, and it says good morning, Frederick. If I do this in the afternoon, it's going to say good afternoon, Frederick. And I want to show you how I've done that. So there's another thing here. So in the index, I no longer have hello, but I have this greeting thing. Now, greeting is not data, it's something else. And this is something else is something that we will also encounter in the next steps. It's called a computed property. So it's calculating the value of greeting when we ask for it. And the reason why is because it's dynamic, it changes over time. And this is what it looks like. So in main.js, we have data, which is our name and our cat image, which is what we wrote. We have our methods flip cat. And then we have this extra thing, which is computed. And note that it looks just like methods. There's one computed property called greeting, and there's a bunch of things going on, but there's actually, most of it is just logic. So what we do is we ask JavaScript for date, which will give us the current date. And then we ask for the hour, the current hour. And then we prepare a greeting. And then we say, well, if the hour is before 6 or after, this is or, after the hour is bigger than 22, bigger or equal, then we are going to say good night with a name. If the hour is before 12, so this is what happens first. If that's not the case and the hour is before 12, then the greeting is good morning. So if the hour is before 12, it's morning. If the hour is before 18, it's good afternoon. And if the hour is before 22, note that same 22 as here, we're going to say good evening. And then we're going to return that greeting. So this is not data. It's not something that we can say here where we, well, we could try, but we could say greeting here, and then we can say good morning. But the problem is that that changes. So this is why it's called a computed property, and it's going to calculate that. Same thing happens. So I don't want to do this by hand because it's, as you can see, it's a lot of typing. But the same thing happens, for example, in the Vue shop, where the computed properties, as you can imagine, is the price of the total price is also computed based on how many items we selected.
And JavaScript knows the date and the time?
Yeah, date and time are built into the JavaScript thing, right? One really important thing that I want to see, and I now go back to my Vue hello start, so my own code here. And I can show that here. So we made this code here, and we made this thing called mounted app. We don't have to do that. We could actually remove that, but this is actually doing a very useful thing for us. And what it's useful for is it allows us access to that mounted app. So in our console here, we can write mounted app, and that's actually a reference to Vue. Now what we can do is we can access all of these data items and all of these methods on the Vue instance. So for example, here we can say mounted app dot name equals, and I can change the name here. And you see that that changes inside of the page. So we have a dynamic page that we can access immediately, and I will also re-render or re-trigger a render of the page immediately here. So this is really powerful. And we can do it with name, but we can also call methods on it. So if we want to verify that flipcat is working, we can also just write flipcat. Note that we have to write the brackets here at the end. Press enter, and now it's flipping that cat. And now I type arrow up to do the last command, and then do that again. So everything that I wrote here is accessible from the console. So that means it's really good to try it out, to check that the properties are correct, to verify that everything's working. It's very useful for us to be able to access that. Nee, heb je die haakjes erachter gezet? En dus hier en... Ah, gewoon ook niet. Ah ja, oké. Dan ga ik eens even komen zien. Ah ja, maar je hebt methodes op zijn Nederlands. Methods. Nee, methods zoals dat. Methods. En dan de S. Dus geen E ertussen. Ja, en nu een O. Met hots. Ja. Dus als dat fout is, dan weten al die methodes niet die erin staan. Moet je niet zo goed op dat je krijgt? Ja, en als je nu op de tab drukt, dan klikt, ja, dat werkt. Dat werkt ervoor dan ook niet meer. Nee. En dan maakt het uit en nu kun je dus puntje fliket doen. En dan met brackets. Ja, dus nu toont het, als je die toont, dus geeft er gewoon de inhoud van die functie aan mensen. En dan brackets. Ja, en nu kun je een pijltje omhoog, meteen terug in een enter. En dan kun je dat blijven doen. Totdat je beurs hebt. All right. I want to take a short break, like 15-minute break, and then we come back here, and then we do a bunch of the other projects. Recording and share my screen again. And as I talked about before, we have a bunch of these projects that we want to do. So the next project is actually this one, which is just like a font preview app. So you have these a font that you see, and then you see all these letters, and then you can choose a style here. So if we just intuitively think about that project, what's the information that we need to know? What's the data of our app? What is important here? So the font, yeah. What do you mean by the font? So you mean these letters, or this letter in the middle, or? So yeah, it's true. We need a list of all the letters that we want to show. Note that is not everything in the font. It's just the uppercase letters, but we have to have that list, that data somewhere. That's true. What else is important here in this app? Specifically, if you think about the state of the app right now, and if you think about the state, so when I click, if you think about the state of the app right now, what is changing between this and this? What is changing? Yeah, so the letter that we're currently looking at, so we could call that like the active letter or the current letter. So the thing that we're currently looking at. And another thing is what is changing in the app if I click these things. So if I switch from regular to black to italic.
It's a different font?
Yeah, it's a different font or a different version of that font or a different style of that font. If you look at Google Fonts, they're called styles. So that's also something that gets set here in the app. And so this is the way that if you make a new app in Vue, and that goes for any framework, and even if you don't use a framework, you have to think about what's the state of my app, what's the data, what's the core data that I can build the rest of the app out of. So if I want to build an app in this specific state, I need to know indeed which letters I have, what the current letter is, and what the current style is. All of that information is important, and we need that information when we're making our Vue app. Now, we don't want to make this from scratch because it's a lot of work. What I'm going to give you, we're going to write all the JavaScript, but what I'm going to give you is a bit of the layout here of the app. So you can see how it's built out of, and then also the CSS, because this is not a CSS workshop, but I will quickly go through the idea of the CSS. If you just look generally at this layout, what would you do CSS-wise? How would you build that up? Any ideas? Een header, ja? Ja, dit. En dat scrolt dan. So it scrolls. En the middle thing, yeah, the main event, yeah. I call this the preview. So the preview, the big preview of the letter. Yeah, and then a footer, indeed, of these buttons here. And if you want to do this layout-wise in CSS, what would you use? which options do we know for layout? There's actually two options that we can use. Yeah, so Flexbox. What's the other one? Grid. Yeah. Right. So there's Flexbox on one side and CSS Grid for the other one. If you're rusty with these terms, this is the place to be, cssgrid.io. I will mostly use Grid in this workshop. In this case, it works much better, I think, because I can have a template for my grid. I can specify that this header needs to be 75 pixels high. That's the width the height that I see here. I can specify that I have another row that's 66 pixels high. That's the thumbnails here. I can specify, and I'm skipping the preview here, I can specify that the style buttons need to be 50 pixels high. And then finally, for this, I can say, okay, just take the rest of the space for the preview. So this is what makes this app basically full screen. And again, remember, this is actually made for an iPhone. So it fits on every screen that I can think of, and it just rescales the main thing. And so the way that works, if you look at the layout, the way that works is app has a single line of CSS grid here called grid template rows that specifies these heights. So it says first row is 75 pixels, then 65 pixels or 66 pixels, then one FR, and one FR is fractional space. In this case, we can think of it as free space. So take up all the free space, and then 50 pixels for the bottom row. So that's basically how we do the layout. It's a really simple way of taking the whole layout. And then we say the height is here. The height of the whole app is the height of the screen. So the height is 100 view height, so 100% of the height of the window or of the screen. And that's basically how we built out this app. So to get started, we're going to start in the Vue glypher start. So the project is called glypher. And then we look at our index.html. I'm going to clean up a little bit because I have too much of a mess here. So it's a good idea to clean out all the other files so we don't accidentally open the wrong one. And this is the one that I have here. So index.html. And again, you can do live server, open with live server to actually see that specific page. And it should look like this. Again, remember, this is a mobile app. So here you want to open the inspector tools, inspect, and then click the device toolbar, this button here, to actually get a responsive layout.
The letters are not shown.
So you don't see a font?
Oh, no, I'm in the wrong.
Yeah, so make sure that your URL is Vue glypher start index.html, right? This is the project that we want to see. And you can verify that if you open this page here, and here in the header you type a different name, my app, then that should change here. And so what I did basically is, and this is something that I propose, and this is where I think where Vue really shines, is what I did initially is just build the thing that I designed in Figma. I built that in HTML. There's nothing of Vue, there's no JavaScript, there's no extra coding, it's just HTML and CSS. So it's basically the whole app, but nothing works. So I can't click these buttons don't do anything, but the layout looks as if it's working, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So how does this build up? Again, as I said before, I have this app element. This app has some CSS, so I can look at main.css. And the first thing to note here is that I have these colors. Remember, I had this color palette here in the beginning. And this is, again, something I got from the Refactoring UI book, or Tailwind framework uses that as well. I use these colors as variables, and I can refer to them later with these var words. So here I can say var -- teal -900, and then it's going to take that specific color here. The useful thing is here, I can very easily change. So I have them all numbered. So they're all sort of perceptually going from dark to white, and they sort of have the same distance. I sort of did this by eye, so they're not exactly, but they're good enough. And so the 100 is the lightest one, and which is almost white, and the 900 is the darkest one, which is almost, well, sort of black, not quite. And same goes for teal. So they should match up. If I use a green of that tint or 100 or 500, it should match up with the green of that tint. So I can sort of mix and match between the two. And this makes it really easy to design because I don't have to make constant choices of color. I really have a palette. Note, and that's, I think, the core thing. You can also do this by, if you do like a Adobe Color, which you probably know. It used to be Cooler or called Cooler. But here you have these color wheels and you get these color palettes, and sometimes you get these, yeah, you have these trends of these palettes. What? Okay, yeah, what? So like this, for example, or this. The problem with these palettes is they're super, like you can't make your app like this because everything's just either full on purple, full on orange. So you need tints when you're making an app. So this is actually not about web interactivity, but you need these sort of gradations in the color. This is, so I would start from something like this, but then I would build out these tinting where you have lighter and darker versions that you can work with, because that's used everywhere in the app. For example, here you see I have a zebra stripe like thing where I have a light, darker, lighter, darker, lighter. You can't do that here because it will just be screaming at you all the time because those colors are really harsh. So I want variations of these colors. This is really a nice way, I think, to design these apps, is to make sure that you start with something like this. And to really make it clear, I have these, which also means that if I make an app here, for example, and I'm not happy with the header, so I want the header to be a bit lighter, I can just switch. I can just say, well, I had the 700, let's try the 600. Well, no, maybe the 200. So I can sort of go in the colors and sort of see the variations and look for the one that I like. So that's kind of a neat way to do colors, and it's really easy. It makes sure that when you're designing the app, you don't have to make these constant micro decisions of every color has to be like this infinite amount of options. You have some limited options. Anyway, that's a lot of stuff for the root. Then I have my star. So this is basically all the elements have a margin of 0 and a padding of 0. So basically remove all the margins and paddings. I set box size into border box, and also user select to none, which means I can't select any elements. I can't drag over elements, which is often what I want in an app. Then I have the body element, which is has a background color, which is this teal color. This is how I will refer to all the colors, and then the font. And then I have app, and this is the core one that I talked about before. This is set to grid, and then the rows are the rows exactly as I specified them here in Figma. So that's why it's so useful to do it in Figma first. I can specify. And then I have different ones for the header, for the glyphs. So that's this one. Here, I think there's one key element more, which is that the glyphs are displayed as a grid with 26 elements, each 65 pixels. And then I have overflow X auto. And this is really important because this one makes sure that I can scroll to specifically only this element and not the whole page, right? That's what the overflow X is saying. It's like, if it's too much room on the X, just automatically add a scroll bar. And then there's one funny one. So that's this one. So each glyph has a color, which is green 300, and they're all white and blah, blah, blah. But they also have end child even, which is every even child has a different background color. So this is a CSS thing that's built in where it says, well, all the even elements, or I can also do the odd ones, of course, has a specific different color. So this one, and so forth. They all have this even color. So that allows me to zebra stripe with just one line of CSS. And then one extra thing that I also want to highlight is that one of them is active. So one of them has this active thing. And so if I set this to B, for example, then you see that that one is the active one. And what's different about the active one, so the glyph active has a different background color, right? And that background color is the same color as the preview, so that it sort of feels like this is like a tab that's connected to the two. It has a visual connection. And the same thing happens with the styles at the bottom. So here at the bottom, we have a style. They're all styles, and then the italic one is also active. So that means that that active one also has a different background color, right? And the rest is not very crazy, I think. Any questions about that? No, that was really quickly about CSS. Now, what we want to do is we want to end up from this to the actual working app. So we need Vue again. So we're going to do a couple of things to add Vue. So in the first thing we are going to do, add our index.html page here is we're going to add that script again. So we write script source, we select the source thing, and then write https unpackage.com/view add next. That's going to install Vue on this page. All right. And then at the very bottom of the page, so right before the body tag, we're also going to refer to main.js. I already have a main.js, it's just empty here. So I'm going to write script source js/main.js. Yeah, this one, Michelle, also comes from the other page. And note, all the code is here. So if you go to index.html, you can also just copy and paste the code here because I already wrote it for you. So if you want, you can cheat a little bit by going there and watching what I did. Okay, then in main, what we're going to do, maybe first is log, right, hello, just to verify that in our console, we actually see that message. So it should say hello here. So just printing that out. If it doesn't happen, that means that there's no link between JS, JavaScript, and HTML. And then, of course, we don't know. So we can leave that. If it works, we can remove that. But this is just like a sanity check to check that everything's correct. Nee, main JS. Ja. CSS kom ik niet meer aan. And then we're going to make an app again. So we write const app view.create app, and then do all the brackets again. Write data, return, and then now we are going to specify the data for our app. And now we have to think a little bit about the kind of data that we need. So we said it before, the first thing that we need probably is which letters are available to us. So what the letters are. In this case, they're all the uppercase letters. Yeah, I'll let you type a little bit before I continue. So lots of brackets. Again, if you're confused with that, you can also copy and paste them from the previous app that you wrote because it uses the same system. There's nothing different there. But then what we need to do, or what we want to do, is we want to do a couple of things. The first thing that we want to do is we want to get rid of this whole list. Basically, we want Vue to let that render us for us. It's all the same thing. It's just the difference is the letter itself. So this is something where Vue can help us, of course. And then we want to be able to select that. But first we do the list. Now, if we talk about lists, this is a really important concept. Then lists are going to be everywhere. So this is the code where I want to end up. And I will suggest in a minute that you copy and paste it. But first think about it. So the glyphs, I have a list of glyphs or letters that are basically A, B, C, D. So these are all the things that I can click here. And lists are used everywhere. So in this case, they're used as a list of elements. But if we talk about our font editor, these will be a list of all the forms of the shapes, for example. So every point in the letter of the font editor is also part of that list. So the font editor, and I can show you a little bit of that. Here we have a glyphs list. And so each glyph is basically a list of X and Y coordinates. Then in this case, this list of glyphs is just this list. And we want to include that. So we're not going to write this all by ourselves. Instead, we're going to cheat a little bit by going to view glypher end. the JS main JS, and then here copy that first element here. So basically copy everything from line 1 to line 28. This is just our list of glyphs, so we don't have to type that by hand. It's kind of annoying. And then we go back to our own script. We can remove this console log, and then we just paste in that list. And so for our data, what we want to return here is the glyphs. So I don't use the word letters here because they can also be other characters, but in a font they're called glyphs. So the glyphs are this big array of glyphs. And I wrote it with an uppercase here to indicate that this list is constant. It's always the same. And I wrote it here lowercase. That's kind of a unuseful distinction, but it's just, you just have to copy that. So we want the list here, and then we write glyphs here. And now we can actually start using that in our page. Right. So going back to our page, so our index.html, again, make sure that you have the correct index.html. I'll put them side by side so you can see it a little bit better. Remember, we have this whole array of glyphs, and that's kind of useless to do it this way. Instead, we already have these glyphs, right? They're here, they're in the list, we can use them. And so the way that we do that in Vue is we take one element. So instead of taking all of the elements, we just remain one element. So we remove all of these until the Z. So from B to Z, we remove all of them. And we are going to just have one of them, A. So going back here, we just see one element, right? And now we let Vue basically loop over this glyph. So do this as many times as we have letters. And the way that we do this is we write v-4. The V means that this is a Vue thing. 4 equals, and then we write between brackets, glyph in glyphs. Note that this glyphs thing refers to this thing in data. And now if we save, oh wait, we don't see it working yet because we haven't mounted our app yet, so we'll do that in a minute. But this will give us all letter A's, but we'll first mount our app. So back to main.js, we write const mounted app equals app.mount, mount as .app. Like this. And what should happen now is that we see all A's. So we see A 26 times. Right, so we get this and we can scroll through this list of A's, this infinite list of letter A's. Nee, werkt het niet al? Ja, dat is goed. Een beetje scrollen, in Vue create app. App.mount moet je hier schrijven. Normaal zou je ook een fout moeten krijgen. App.mount is not function. Dus dat geeft aan dat je probeert iets te doen op app dat niet bestaat.
Nee. Ja. Ik heb ook app is not defined.
App is not defined. Ah ja, lijn 7 hier. En dat is omdat je die app in hoofdletter hebt geschreven. Dus nu krijg je allemaal. Is dat? Vue is not defined. Dat wil zeggen dat je die unpackaged link hebt. Dus je ziet ook bij 13 bij komen, dan is je script source geschreven. Bij 1 is dat HTML. Ja, die ook met wijzer had in de is / en moet je de bovenaf. Ja. Ja, right. Het is een slow start. Vue is not defined. Ja, dus bij u is ook iets mis unpackage.com / Vue en niks. Geen doelpunt. Oké, en nu krijg je een andere fout. Dus oké, dan moet je even opzij scrollen. V4 glyph in. Glyphs, en dan heb je hier V4 met F-O-R-E geschreven. F-O-R geschreven. Ja, zie je? Ja. En nu heb je hier data schrijven. Ja, dat zit er ook in. Het is wel raar dat die kleur is anders dan bij u. Heel raar. Dus ga je iets opzetten? Ah ja, dat is allemaal active. Dus die active moet weer afhalen. Dus hier staat glyph active. Dat wil zeggen dat je nu 26a zet, dat die allemaal actief zijn. Dat kan je maar niet doen. Ja, glyph is echt in elkaar zetten. Ja, perfect. Okay. Alright, so there's some setup and there's a bunch of errors as you can see that can happen. Let's show you. So that if the name is wrong, so I'll show you just some of the errors. Why am I doing this? Because a lot of programming is just figuring out errors. So this is a common, this is one that I just saw. Now this name is wrong and this name is different. So now it says uncalled reference error, app is not defined at line 38. So I would check at line 38 where it says I want to use app, but there's no app. But you say, well, there is an app, but now you have to double check that that really this thing is called the same thing. So if this has a different name, then it won't work because it won't be able to find it. So oftentimes when it gives an error like this, it means you have a spelling mistake like here. Another mistake that I saw is this: if this URL is wrong or if the script is not included, then it says Vue is not defined. And that can only happen if the script of Vue is not loaded correctly. So double, triple check that this URL is right. And then there's a couple of spelling mistakes. This is an unfortunate one in Vue, but if something's wrong here, so if you write dato or something, it doesn't give an error, but it doesn't treat this as data, right? Data is special in Vue because data is actually what the information is in your app. But if this is called differently, then it's just a function on your app and Vue ignores this, but we don't want it to ignore it. So make sure that these things, data, methods computed, that they're always correct. So those are some common ones. Now they're all A's. How would we fix this so that we don't get all A's, but we get a different letter every time? Any ideas? Where does the A come from actually in our HTML?
From the div.
Yeah, so it's right here, right? So if we change this to X, then they're all X's, right? So what we can do is the same thing that we did in our hello example is we can use Vue's templating system to actually say, well, this is dynamic, this needs to change. And the way that we do this in Vue is by using these double brackets here. So we write these double brackets, and here the thing that we write is actually this thing. This is called the alias or the variable that's inside the loop, but I like the name alias. So this is the name that we give to each glyph individually. So we do this thing 26 times, every time for every glyph. And each time this alias is different. So if we write glyph here, that means that the first time will be A, then B, then C, and so forth. And now we see that we get all these letters here. Note that this is just text, right? So it's part of the text, so we can write something before and after. So if we want to have like, I don't know, say a $sign in front and a $sign at the end, we can still do that, right? This is just part of the text. Or we can write letter A. Of course, that doesn't fit at all in our little bracket thing, but this is just the text that we see here, right? All right, so we need
a question.
Yes?
I put it in the chat. It's my letters don't display. I
Ja.
enkel de afschrift en ik heb in de chat gezegd wat mijn console zegt.
Ah ja, niet veel. Dus je hebt geen foutboodschap, maar dat is gewoon de standaard, want je krijgt dat ook in mijn console. Wacht, hè. Je moet eens checken, Maarten, dat je hier op het einde, dat dit erbij staat. Die mounted app is app.mount.
Ja.
Dat je dat hebt en dan... maar je hebt de 26 A's of maar eentje?
Ik heb 1 A'tje.
Ah ja. En staat dit er ook bij? V4, glyph in glyphs?
Ja. Niet fout geschreven.
Wat kan dat nog zijn? U voert hem uw JavaScript uit. Dus als je hier van boven bijvoorbeeld console log test doet, krijg je dan effectief hier ook test te zien. Maarten?
Ja, ik ben niet aan het proberen. Ah, wacht. Nee, dat krijg ik niet te zien.
Ah ja, oké. Dus, en staat er hier van onder dan een link naar uw JavaScript? Op lijn 30 is dat bij mij. Staat hier script source JS main. Nee?
Daar is het.
Dus wat er dan gebeurt, is dat eigenlijk je pagina niet interactief is.
Ja.
Dan gebeurt er niks. Ja. Dus je laat dan je view wel, maar je doet daar niks mee. Dus je app wordt niet gemount en je start eigenlijk je app niet. Dus je roept die eigenlijk niet. Het zou kunnen dat je nu nog andere errors krijgt, hè, maar dat is natuurlijk wel belangrijk dat je dat hebt. Dus daarom dat we die een check hier van boven doen, om te checken dat effectief onze JavaScript geladen wordt.
Ja, ik ben mee.
All right. So next is we want to be able to click these letters and actually see the different versions of that letter. And the way that we do this is by remembering what the current glyph is. So in our return here, in our data, we're going to write current glyph. And we're going to initially set a value. Remember, this is the initial data. This is where we start out from our app. So our current glyph, initially, it would make sense to make that the A, for example. Now that doesn't change anything. Remember, this is just data that's inside of our app, but as long as we don't use it, there's no real purpose to that. So what I'm going to do here is in our index end is I'm going to say that one of the classes can be active. And remember, I had this extra class called glyph active that is going to be set for active, but I don't want to set that for all of them. I just want to set that for one of them, which is the active one. So whenever my glyph here, so whenever this alias of glyph is equal to the current glyph, then I want to set active. Does that make sense? So I'm going through them, A, B, C, D, E, and so only when the current glyph is actually the A, then I want to see that. And so we can also do that in Vue by setting a class attribute. And you can sort of see that at the bottom here because I have it open. So here I have class written like this, but I can also write class like this. And this is a class that's going to be dynamic for whatever I want to set here. Specifically. Ja, ik ben hier in Vue glyph start aan het werken, maar the one you see at the bottom is actually my end thing, which I use for reference to make sure that I have the same code here. And so this is very different from what we normally do with class, because here what we want to do is we can set a couple of classes and we can set whether they're true or not. So we can say, well, for example, if we write active is true, then the class will be active for all of them. And now you see that all of them will be green because they're all sort of active. So, and you can verify that as well here. They all have this active class added to them. Now, of course, that doesn't really help us because now they're all active. Before none of them were active, but now they have all this active thing. But this thing, this true, can be replaced with an expression. And this expression is the key where we say the glyph, remember that's this alias here, this glyph, if that's equal to, and we in JavaScript write 3 equal signs to the current glyph, then that's active. So now it's active only when the glyph is equal to the current glyph, and I have to write it correctly. So now what we should see is that the A is active and is green, but the other ones are not. So going back again, this colon class means that we're binding something in Vue. So this is a special attribute that's where this expression is something that will generate a class for us, but it's not the class itself. And in Vue, for classes, what we do is we basically give a list saying, okay, active is true only in this condition. We could say something else. Glyph is true only in this condition. It's a big letter only in this condition, and so forth. So in this case, active is true when the glyph, remember that's this glyph, so this alias that changes all the time, is equal to the current glyph, which is set here. So we see it here. And now, and this is why I wanted to show the mounted app. Does this work for everybody? No? Okay. I'm going to verify, but check also in the inspector tools and note that one of the glyphs is now active, right? So the A is now active, but the rest is not. So this has two classes, glyph and active, but the rest doesn't have that.
How do you check if it's active in the inspector tools?
So here I select the A, and then I see that this one says div class equals glyph active and A, and glyph B is just glyph, so it doesn't have the active class. And so active, what it does is it sets the background color to teal 500, which is the same color as this preview. That's why it's active. I'm going to check quickly. Ezra? Yeah, let's see the yes. Any current status statement really did. Well, daar is quotes was before is zo'n dubbel quote. Ja. Die quotes zijn wel belangrijk. Yeah, we're using everything at the same time through each other, so it's kind of annoying. But what I want to show here is that now, remember we had this mounted app, right? So we had that thing at the bottom here. So here we can say mounted app dot current glyph, and we can change that. So if we set that to B, for example, we see that now Vue does everything for us. So it's going to change the active class, remove that from A and add that to B. And of course, if we do C and then D, so it changes to the current glyph to that state that we have. This is really cool because that means that we can now refer to an element and verify, even if we don't have clicking enabled yet, we can verify that this works. Now there's one big oversight, and that's this big letter in the middle, of course, doesn't change because it's not changing here. So how will we fix this? Think about that. How will we fix that the big letter here in the middle changes? What? Yeah. What do we need to write there? So you mean this part, Michelle? Yeah, true. Can you do that? So how do we make a link to a letter before? We use these two curly braces, right? So can we write maybe two curly braces here, like this? And then what should we write in the middle? Yeah, how do we call it here? It's actually much easier. Remember, this current glyph is set to the letter that we want to show, and this is literally what we want to show. So we can just write current glyph. So what we want to see here in the middle, in this big letter, is just the letter that we selected, nothing more, nothing less. So we write with these brackets current glyph, and now if we do mounted app current glyph, we change that, then we see that we also change this letter here. So this is literally going back to the data and saying, okay, which part of the data do we want to see here? And it's basically the same as we did in the hello app where we said hello, comma, and then the curly's name. Here we do the same thing. So we don't write hello current glyph, but we could right? It's just text. Or if we want to do an exclamation mark after the letter, we can do that as well. It would be cool if we could click them though. So we can't do that yet. And this is not actually that difficult either. What we do here is as an attribute, so we have class here, we have colon class, we have the v4, we can also add click. So when we click the item, what needs to happen? We could call a method here that changes that letter, but it's actually so simple that we can just write it here. What needs to happen is that the current glyph needs to be equal to the glyph. So again, to that alias, to the one that we have selected right now, that we're rendering now. And now if we save, you will see that Prettier actually formats this on different lines, which is okay. You can leave it on one line. But now clicking these letters will actually change the letter here. And I have this exclamation mark here at the end, which I can remove. Does this work? Dit is het enige dat ik heb toegevoegd nu. You can also go watch at the end, so the view glypher end index.html that has the same exact code. So it's this part. So if you're really stuck, you can look at that code and then verify that everything's correct here. Werkt het? Is it out? Fien? Oh ja. Ja, een beetje op mijn tijd letten. Dus, so remember in the very beginning of the class, we did this all by hand, right? We did document query selector, we did set attribute. We could do this by hand, but there's a lot of things going on because now, whenever we change the glyph in Vue, we don't even have to think about the fact that we set the active class. It's just one line. But if we want to do it before, what we need to do is select the old element, remove the active class, and then take the new element and add the active class. And you see immediately that that becomes a lot of stuff that we need to think about and do before this app actually is working. And then of course we need to change the letter in the middle as well. And oftentimes a lot of these things go wrong because we forget one or we don't do this in sync. So we add one thing, but we don't add it in this other condition where this thing or this thing happens. And soon this app becomes really complex. The way that Vue works is this idea of reactive rendering, which means that it reacts to the fact that we change something in the data. So whenever we click here, current glyph is changed, which means our data in Vue is changing, and that triggers a reaction in the app. So it triggers the app to basically re-render and think about, okay, which parts are changing in the app? Where do I use this current glyph? Well, I use it here, so this element needs to change. I use it here, so this element needs to change as well. Well, basically, I have to re-loop this through this list again. That all happens automatically. We don't even have to think about it. But it's really important that we realize that Vue is actually doing a lot for us and makes writing bug-free code a bit easier because we don't have to think about all of these different states that happen in our app when we have multiple things going on. Then the same thing happens for styles, and it's actually really the same thing. So here, what we need to do is we're also going to add a class to our preview. So remember here we have large italic. If we go look at our CSS for the Vue glypher start, in the preview there's actually a class for italic and a class for black and a class. So italic has a font style of italic, black has a font weight of bold. So if we change this to black, then the font becomes black. But of course these tabs don't change. So here the same thing happens as before. So we're going to also in main, after current glyph, we're also going to set current style. So what's the style of our app here? And we're going to use the style regular, so the default first. And now here for the class here, so remember this gets rendered here. We can also write dot class equals, and then we can write current style. So it's going to add a style, not the word current style, but it's going to look at the current style they have set and use that. So that means that current style, we have to save all of them. Yeah, so I added current style regular here, and I added current style here. What should happen here in our app is that our style is now back to our regular style, but now if we write mounted app dot current style equals black, then now we see the black version of our letter. Or if we write italic, then we see the italic version of our letter. Right? So even though we can't click these buttons yet, we can still verify in the console that this is working because we can change the data and that has an effect on the app. The reason why that has an effect is because of CSS, right? Because our current style italic actually has a link to that italic style. So the font style is here italic, so that style gets applied. And then for all of these styles, what we are going to do is we're going to also add a class, again, of active. We're going to say, well, it's active if the current style equals, in this case, regular with single quotes. And then I'm going to copy and paste that part and place it for black as well, and place it here, removing active for italic as well, and then changing this to black and this to italic. So note here we don't, I'll leave it open like this. Here we don't use a loop. Instead, we just say, well, this thing is active when the current style is regular. So that makes sense because that's for the regular one. If the current style is black, then we want to see black. If the current style is italic, then we want to see italic. So now the buttons also change, but they're not interactive yet, but they also change depending on what the current style is. So now if we refresh, we would see that the current thing is set to regular. And now the thing is in sync. So if we now set mounted app current style to italic, both the button and the text change. Again, we get that for free, or we get that because Vue actually does this reactive rendering. It knows that this needs to affect this part, but then also the old current style. So the old button needs to be inactive again. And then the current style is also applied to that preview glyph. So can you see this? Again, you can't click them, but can you see this, that it's regular now? The style is here set to regular. I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see the whole line. Note that I removed active here from the last one. So the last one, italic, had active here. I removed that because otherwise I would see two active ones. I just want to see one. Wacht, ik heb de indruk dat Vue nu niks niet meer doet. Kun je consoles erop openen? Waarom zegt hij gewoon voor een glyph? Wacht, kun je zien dat die brackets, dus hier op het einde moet er één haakje staan. Ja, dat is al iets beter. Wacht, want dan gaan we automatisch twee brackets schrijven. Dus je moet eentje weg doen. Ja. Dat is goed. Ja. Die kun je klikken. En dan die werken nog niet, maar je kunt hier wel typen mounted app dot current style. Ja, is gelijk aan in black bijvoorbeeld. Ja, en dan switch je in een tab en het font. Ja. Cool. Ja, die haakjes. Dus hier op de een haak. Dubbele quotes na die regular. En dan maken we er automatisch twee kijk eens of het effectief is. Ja, het is even regular mistake. Dat is gewoon dat zien dat we doen. Dus deze tab is niet echt. De current style is ook echt.
Ja, als ik dan hier klik en zie ik die mountains, current style,
Ja, een switchen naar black. Ja. Tot net voordat je op de en dan wordt de style wordt black en de style. En hier is ook een spatie. Style, quote, en spatie. Ja.
Dat is wel een goed voor die.
Ja, en dan zet je daar logisch en let daarop en doe het. En nu kun je inderdaad een hoofd zetten. Dus ook daar doen we het.
Dat was een beetje.
En dan ook een quote, een Italië bijvoorbeeld, die gaat natuurlijk ook black zijn.
Ja, als je black mee.
Maar ik vond het. Dus hier in Italië staan, in dat fonds. Die class large Italië, maar dat is Italië moet eigenlijk veranderen. Dus als Italië is Italië, dus dat blijft dat regular is. Ja. Dus wat heb ik gedaan? Ik heb large geschreven, die Italië gaat er dan uit. En dan staat er een dubbelpuntje class, die dubbelpunt wil zeggen dit is iets dat niet is. En daar zeg ik current staan. Dus de current staat toe naar die class. Dus bij regular staat er een large regular, bij Italië staat er een large Italic, bij black staat er een large black. En in CSS pikt er dat aan. Dat staat gewoon in de glyph aan. Ja, dus stel dat ik heb niet op de scroll gedaan. De enige wat ik doe is bij die en ook zit in dit. Oké. And then clicking. So if we want to be able to click on this element, we also add an add click here. And think about what we need to happen in this click event. What should happen here? What do we need to change? Think about what we changed here. So here in click, we set the current glyph to glyph. What would need to happen here in this click event?
The div has to change color, correct? Or
Yeah. But, right, but and that's the thing I think we have to think about in Vue is we don't really need to think about which color or which whatever, but instead we think about this as data. So what needs to change in our core state of our app? This is actually all we need to render the app, right? This is the core state of our app. So in this case, if we click regular, what needs to happen is that the current style needs to change to regular. If we click black, the current style needs to change to black. And then what effect that has on the rest of the page, that is something that we let Vue figure out because we don't have to do all that work. Because a lot of things would need to happen. The old style need to be removed. The new one need to be added. The class needs to be added here. The old class needs to be removed. But we don't have to do that because Vue will handle that for us. Instead, all we need to do here is say current style equals, and then between single quotes, regular. That's the click event. That's what we need to have happen when we click on regular. And of course, regular doesn't do very much. So we're also going to add that for black and for italic, where the current style is black. And then for italic, it needs to become italic. And now we should be able to click those buttons and have that work. So now if we save, it can be that some lines jump to the next line because they're too long, but now we should be able to click these and have that work. Again, if you're confused, check in the Vue glyph end, all that code is there. You see the click handlers here. So it's exactly the same code that we wrote there. I tried to write the same code so you can verify and check that that's actually what needs to happen. All right. Ja, ja, dit moet gebeuren. Nu werkt alles eigenlijk. Dus dit kunnen we klikken, dit kunnen we klikken. En we kunnen switchen. Dus we kunnen black, en dat blijft dan black als we ook hier switchen. If we switch italic here, it stays italic while we're clicking these buttons here.
Ja. Maar ja, eigenlijk is alles italic.
Nee, als we black klikken, krijg je geen italic letter.
Maar wel is alles italic.
Ah ja, dan moet je eens kijken, Kato. Dus hier heb ik, dus, ik had met anders dat ook gemist, dus hier staat bij class ook current style. Dus wat gebeurt er hier? Ik ga dat element selecteren en kun je dat zien. Dus die letter hier heeft large black op het moment dat ik op black sta. Als ik hier op regular druk, komt er hier large regular. Als ik hier op italic druk, krijgt hem die class large italic. Dus zie, dat verandert. Als ik black doe, komt er hier large black. Als ik regular doe, komt er hier large regular. En dat heeft een effect op de stijlen die ik zie in CSS. Dus ik heb een stijl gemaakt voor black met een font weight van 900. En ik heb een stijl gemaakt voor italic, waar ik de font style op oblique, dus italic zet eigenlijk. Dus dat verandert die klassen in CSS. En hoe dat werkt in Vue, is dat we hier zeggen dubbelpunt class. Met andere woorden, Vue gaat dit managen voor ons. En current style wil zeggen dat hem die style gaat zoeken. En dus als dat hier italic is, dan voegt hem hier italic eigenlijk aan toe. En dus die italic die hierbij stond, die is nu weg. Hè? Want die is dynamisch nu. Ja. Voilà, en dat is alles wat we doen voor deze pagina. So it's everything that we do for this page. Note that we started from an HTML page that we wrote, and then we gradually add interactivity to the page by doing it in Vue. So by collapsing loops into, or multiple elements that look the same, into a loop, where we keep the list as data. By managing state, by using click event handlers and changing something in the app itself. And then also by triggering or changing renders on that state, for example, here by the current style or the current glyph, for example. So that also triggers or changes depending on what that glyph is and that style is. And again, Vue does a lot of that for us. So we really can think about the core state of our app. What's important if you make your own app is this part. It's really thinking about, okay, what's the essential information that I need for my app? And what's information that I can compute from other information? And here my core information is really these three key pieces of thing, and all the rest comes from that. All right, it's 12:25. We have 2 projects to go. I think we don't have time for 2, so I'll let you pick from the ones that I have. What I would also suggest, maybe if you're up for that, is that next week, normally we had a different workshop, but is that we just do like a repeat of this workshop or a continuation, like a more on this workshop without actually seeing new material. So if we take one of these projects today, we can do the other one next week, for example, and then we can also go deeper into different projects because we have some free time next week on Wednesday. But so one of the projects, to remind you, is the shop project, where you can type a name and then you can see and then add styles and then do these things. And the other project is the font editor, which is this interactive thing. So this thing is exactly the same as before. Also works with the current glyph, but then of course the middle part, the preview, is now interactive. And then we can also change the grid size.
I prefer this one.
Yeah.
I would personally like to do the shop, but I defer to the majority.
Okay, we have to vote. Wants to do the font editor, and people in chat can also respond if you want, or shout out the one you want. And remember, we can do the other one next week if you want, so we don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to worry that we're not getting to the other one.
But maybe it's nice to do this one now because
you know a little bit about it. Yeah. Ezra, is that okay for you? Yeah. All right, so we close this down. Really important. We close all the windows down so we don't have anything open, because otherwise we get confused. And we're going to go to View Font Edit Start. And here I have the index.html and I have the main.js, and note that I already have some code here. The reason why is that I don't want to do everything from scratch, but I want to explain you what's going on. So I want to do open with live server, make sure that I have the right page open here. So the URL should be view font edit start index.html. And I can already have this interactivity, which we just built, like these letters I can click, but then I don't have any preview element in the middle. So let's go through that. So we have an app again. We have, and this all again is designed in Figma, but it's basically the same as we had before. So we have our app, and our app consists of a grid layout with a header, the glyphs, the preview element, and then the controls at the bottom. And then in main.js, we already have some views set up. So we have this view create app, we have the data, we have the glyphs like before, we have the current glyph. And then, and this is different because the glyphs here have a different format. Before they were a list, but this is a bit different. This is not a list. Instead, this is a dictionary or an object. And we can see that difference if we open the console. So if I type glyphs here, what I get is an basically an object that contains arrays. So I can type glyphs A, for example, like this. And this is going to give me an array of arrays, each with a point. So what is it specifically that I want to see? And I'll show it in the end project so you can see what I'm actually looking at. Every letter consists of a list of points. They're all connected. So I can't do holes, for example, in this system because I just have one list. I can't do holes, but I can connect a list of points like this. And each point is itself a list with two items, X and Y. So the X and Y values. But to make it manageable, all these numbers are really small. They're all between 0 and 10 or something. So it's really like a bitmap font that we just say, okay, now we go from here to here and from here to here and from here to here. And then the grid size is what makes them actually scale up. So a grid size of 50 means that I take this value of like 4 and then multiply it by 50 to get the actual location of the letter A, which in this case is this would be this point. Oh no, specifically this point here. So at 200 pixels from the side, right? That makes sense. So the glyphs is a bit different here, but that also means that if we take the names of our glyphs, or if we just list over the glyphs, we won't actually get the right information. Instead, what we need to do, although probably this would work. Yeah, okay, this also works. But what I do here is I ask for the object keys. So I ask for a list of all of these. So A, B, C, just like before, I just want a list of these. So asking for object.keys of glyphs gives me the exact list that I had before. Remember, this was the list that we had in the previous project. So a list of A, B, C, D, and so forth. This list I need because I want to render this item. So here, instead of saying glyph in glyphs, I do glyph in glyph names. And glyph names is this computed thing here. But apart from that, all the rest is exactly as we saw before. All right. So let's go to rendering, because I think that's the most important thing, is actually seeing something in the middle. We don't have anything here in the middle. So the preview is just empty. How are we going to render this? Well, the trick that we're going to use here is we're going to use an SVG. So SVG is a scalable vector graphics format, and we use it for a couple of things. So if you look at the preview here, you see that we have an SVG, which we'll write by hand here, of a width of 100% and a height of 100%. So it's basically taking up all the space. And then inside I have two groups. One is the grid you see in the background, and the other one is the shape. Ignoring the grid for a moment, if we look at the shape, what it has is this polygon. This is my shape itself with points. So 100, 600, 300, 100, 500, 600. What are these points? Well, they're actually these values, but then converted into the size of this grid, right? So if we change the grid size, these points will change because they will be recomputed based on that. And then the other one that I see is glyph dots, and those are the little markers that I see here on top. So it's this one, this one, this one. In this case, there are 3, but if I have a letter with more, then of course I get more dots. Does that make sense? All right, so let's do that first. And then I ignore the grid for now, but the grid is basically lines. So it's this line, this line, this line. And I do first horizontal lines, all of those, and I do vertical lines. And of course, this will happen with a loop. I don't do this by hand. Okay, so ignoring the grid for now, let's do the shape first. So we're going to go to our index.html and make an SVG. So we write SVG, width of 100%, and a height of 100%. And SVG basically allows you to code a shape, to allow you to code a form. So inside of the SVG, I have two elements that I just saw. So I have the grid, the background, and then I have the shape. So I'm going to also here say G class equals grid, which will stay empty for now. And then another one called G class equals shape. And then there's the shape itself, which is a polygon. And here that polygon will have points. And these are the points of my shape. So really quickly, if I write basic shape, then I can show you what that happens. So write 100, 100, 100, 200, 200, 200. Does that work? And I close this polygon like this, then I would get a simple polygon shape here. Like this. And these are the coordinates of my point. So it's always x comma y space, x comma y space, x comma y, right? Depending on what you want to do, of course, you would use a different shape. So in this case, I can use a polygon because it fits with what I want to do. But maybe your shape is a bunch of circles, or it's a path, or it's maybe an image or something completely different. Then you would use a different shape. But in my case, polygon fits perfectly with what I want to do. Of course, these points will need to be calculated dynamically. But here, what I should see is that I should see a shape that looks like this. Remember, these coordinates don't have to be exactly the same because we will replace them in a minute, but it's just to show you what we need to do. I'm also going to make sure that I get the right one here.
Polygon in SVG-tekst, is dat iets Vue?
Nee, dat zit in uw browser. Dat kun je ook gebruiken zonder Vue. Ja, so that's just part of the browser. All right, so these points are not dynamic. Do you see this shape here? Yeah. Yeah. So note that it already has a color and a background. That's because you could also style this in CSS, and I do. So I can use fill and shape and color and all of these things in CSS for that element. So that's why these names are important. But this needs to be dynamic. So I have to think about, okay, how do I make it dynamic? Well, I can't just use these values immediately, these main values, because they're way too small. So if I would just use these values, what would happen is that everything would be fit like tightly in the corner. So I don't want to see that. Instead, what I want to do is I want to make a computed thing. I want to calculate these points based on the original values of these points. And I'm going to do that in a couple of steps because if I do it immediately, I need a couple of these parts later on. And I'm going to show you the final code just to make sure that you understand. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to have something that looks like this, right? So what is this? It's basically x, y, x, y, x, y, but as a string with a comma in between. So I need a way to get the points, and then I need a way to put these points together. And this is kind of a complex thing, but this is specifically what I want to do. So I have this dot glyph point. So imagine that I get all these points on the correct positions. I then take the x and y values. So each point has the x and y values. And then I use this, which is basically saying, take the x, comma the y, and then join these things together with a space. Now, I haven't written this yet. And you see that it's a lot of complexity to add because there's a lot of brackets and a lot of things going on. But this is like the shortest way that you can write this. You can also do it with adding strings together, but this is like the short way. Now, this refers to glyph points, which we don't have yet. So what is glyph points? Well, glyph points basically says I take all the glyphs out of there, take the current glyph, and then remember the current glyph is this thing. and then map over the points. So take all of these points, the X and Y values, and then I want to use these X and Y values, but I want to multiply them with some value. I want to multiply them with the size of the grid, right? And I could do this directly, but instead I made this function, this helper function called point to view. So take the point, this value, and convert that to the view, so what we see on screen. And that's also a function that's inside here, which I will show, which is this one. And you see there's a couple of layers, and the reason why is because I also have to go the other way around when I click on an item. So point of view, what happens here is that I take the size of the grid, so something needs to be added in a moment, which is the size of the grid. I take the size of the grid and then I multiply that by 2, and then at X multiply by the grid size. Why do I do this? Well, if I just would use the grid size, what would happen is that the letter would appear here all the way to the side, and I want to give it a bit of space. So doing this dot grid size multiplied by 2 basically moves the X value a little bit further along the way. And the same I do for Y, only as you will see, the letter is upside down because this is made for a font editor. And for font editors, the Y starts at the bottom and goes up. So here I have to flip it. And the way that I flip it is to do 12 minus the Y value. 12 is the maximum that I can do. And then say, multiply that with the grid size. Phew. All right, let's try. Remember, you can always go back to the final code, but we'll do it step by step together. So the first thing that I need is, so I had data, I have computed. The first thing that I also want is a method. So I'm going to add here at the bottom a block called methods and write this method, which is called point to view. Remember, what this method needs to be able to do is take an X and a Y value, so the original coordinates of this letter, and convert them to points that are in our grid space. And we'll do the very simple one first, which is just to take X and multiply this with grid size. We don't have that yet, so we have to add it. And then take Y and multiply that with grid size. And we'll see it's not correct, but this will already give us some idea of what we're doing. Why do I use these brackets around it? Well, this is a list again. It's a list of 2 coordinates, an X and a Y value. So with these brackets basically means it's a list where the first item is X and the second item is Y. If we use this dot grid size, we also have to add it in our data. So in our data, we're going to write current glyph and then also write grid size, which I'll set to 50 by default. All right, so we have our point to view function. It doesn't do anything yet. This shouldn't change anything here. But now we can use in computed, we can make our 2 methods. And so the first method that we need to do is basically go from our original points to our newly calculated points. And we'll call this glyph points. Remember, this is in computed. So it's basically, this is the original glyphs are here, right? But the computed ones, so the ones that have the new coordinates, those are computed. Those are based on the original ones. So first, let's take out the glyph, and we do that by saying this dot glyphs, and then indexing that on this dot current glyph. So what that means is it takes out the glyph, and we can actually give this a name if we want. So this looks in our array of glyphs, so basically this list, and it's going to look for, in our case, for example, A. And so we get now all of these coordinates. That's our glyph. And then we can say, well, these coordinates are, if we just return them, they're the small ones. Now we can say glyph.map. And map, what it does is it's basically going over all of these points. And for each point, it's going to call a function. And now we're going to go a bit crazy with brackets. So we can immediately take out X and Y by using brackets here, or so round brackets, and then taking out X and Y. So what this does is it basically says, well, glyph consists each time of a small list with X and Y. Instead of taking item 1 and item 2, we just immediately give them names. So we say they're called X and Y. Then we use our fat arrow here. Note that we do this after our first brackets. And then we say this dot point to view with our X and Y values. And then we've done this, now we return that. So we need to return the value of that, and that's what glyph points needs to do. So again, let's make it clear what's going on here. We are taking our points from glyphs. Remember, that's like one of these. We're extracting out, for each point, we're extracting out x and y. And for each of them, we're calling this dot points to view. And the final result, that's what map does, is it makes a new list with all of these points, but now sized up, they're scaled up. So basically, this is like a scaling function, this glyph points. That's what it's doing. It's taking the current glyph and scaling it up so we can see it in the view. All right. That's a lot of coding. If you get confused, you can also go to Vue front end and copy out that method, that computed method glyph points from computed if you're confused here. It's exactly the same, only this is in one line. And here we do it in 2 lines. So we first take the glyph and then we map, but here we do that in 1 line, which we can do as well. If we go to our mounted app here in the console, we can actually ask it to give us the glyph points. Or I should be able to. Oh, sorry, without the brackets at the end. And now what I should see is that I get a list of 3 points, and I get the same points, but now they're much bigger. So instead we had the original points are smaller, but these ones are much bigger. So they're 0, 0, 200, 500, 400, 0. Why is that? Because our grid size is now bigger, right? So mounted app.glyph points, note, no brackets at the end, basically gives us the newly calculated point. These are the ones that are used for our contour. Remember, we are actually preparing these points to go in here, right? So that's what we need to do. So basically all programming is just doing these transformations from data to data to data so that we get something that we can see on screen. And now to convert this to something that looks like this, remember this is just a list, we use glyph contour. And this is what actually will go in our app before. So we now call this dot glyph points. Yeah, so we made a new computed thing after glyph points. And remember, again, you can copy and paste that from Vue end if you're confused. We're doing the same map as we did before. So we also take out X and Y values, but this time the X and Y values are much bigger. And now we are going to assemble them together. And there are multiple ways to do that. Maybe the way that I used it is the shortest way that I know, but maybe that's also a bit confusing. Let's see if we can find a different way to do that. I'm just going to check if this actually makes sense and works. Yeah. So I did it in a different way here. Maybe it's a bit shorter and a bit cleaner to understand. So we take all the points, and for each point, what we're going to do is we're going to take X plus the string of a comma plus Y, right? So each item in our list is now X plus comma plus Y. And then if we would print that out, we get a list saying 0, 0, 200, 500, 400, 0. That's our point. So what it's doing is taking in a point, and we are like a scaled up point, which we already had, and then it's going to basically smash the two together. So smash the X and Y together with a comma in between. That's what this map is doing. It's taking X plus a comma plus Y. Now, we don't want this as a list. We want it to look exactly like here, which means we have these things necessary, but we also want a space in between them. And to do that, we can take that list and join the elements of that list with a space. So join basically says take all of the elements that you have in your list and join them together, make them into one big string, and use a space in between the two. And that's because we need a space here. That's the way that SVG returns that. So now if we ask mounted app.glyph contour, we see that we get all of these points here. If we switch to another glyph here, and we ask again mounted app.glyph contour, we get different numbers, right? Because these numbers are actually the ones from the current glyph, the ones from the one we selected. But we don't see anything yet. Ah, yeah. We're going to fix that. It's like Batman. Ah ja, oké, dat gaan we nog eens. Ik ga het laatste stapje doen, dat iedereen mee is, en dan ga ik het tonen. Het laatste stapje, the last step is basically filling that in. So we made all of this work to be able to use glyph contour, which is, again, remember, computed property, to say here. So instead of points, we're going to say this is something that comes from Vue. And so instead of all of these points, we now write glyph contour, because that's the one that we just made. And now what should happen is that we see an A that's upside down, or a B, depending on where we click. You see we have all these letters, but they're like all the way smashed to the side and they're upside down, but we're already quite far. En dan even checken. Hè. Ik ga deze even aan de kant zetten, dat je ze alle twee kunt zien. Ja, het is een beetje te groot. Dan, ja, dat gebeurt als er iets fout is in de berekening van je lettertjes. Dus iets met een maal of een plus of iets vergeten, dan krijg je een probleem. Wacht, heel even, ik zie ook dat je height verkeerd hebt geschreven. H-I-G-H-T te schrijven. Ja, dat ga je niet veel effect hebben op dit, maar dat is wel belangrijk. Dus het is vooral point of view dat je wil checken. Ja, dus dat is x maal grid size, eenmaal grid size, dat is juist. En dan glyph points wat je moet checken. Dus als je hier mounted at punt glyph points typt, wat krijg je dan? Ja, en je klikt dat open. Dus dat zijn inderdaad 3 elementjes dat verwacht wordt. Een A heeft 2 elementjes, en die zijn ook gedaan. Oké, cool. Dus dan moeten we, dat is niet komen, dan is deze functie fout. Dus in glyph points hier gebeurt iets dat we niet verwachten. Het gaat een beetje op. Ja, en dus hier doen we map van een element met distal points. Ik heb daar 1 man.
Ik kan hier even niet volgen, dus ik heb het gekopieerd.
Ja, ah ja, dus die een zijn allemaal dus.
Denk ik zo. En nu had ik nog dieper.
Ja, dat is
Ik heb iets fout gekopieerd.
Ja, ik heb het wel gemist. Dus bij grid size mis. Dus je verwijst hier naar het is dat grid size. Maar de grid size staat niet aangegeven, dus je hebt geen data voor grid size. Dus wat gebeurt er dan? Hij zegt grid size, ik heb dat niet. Ik vermenigvuldig met een waarde die je niet kent en ik krijg dat dan en dan is van not a number. Dus dat vermenigvuldigt iets dat je niet kent. Dus hier zit de grid size, dubbel punt, en dan 5. Niet als een string, dat is gewoon een nummer. Ja. Ja, nu als je saved, je gaat terug naar Chrome. Dan krijg je nog keihard te zien. Maar je zei dat je dit ook niet kreeg te zien in je sheet. Wacht, maar je staat fout. Je moet eigenlijk in die preview staan. Dus je hebt je preview div. Je begint hier en je eindigt hier. Maar daartussen moet die een SVG. Dus ja, die moet je cutten en dan onder die SVG. Ja, dan doe je de slash div. Wacht, we sluiten eens uit eerst. Dus. Ja, ik denk dat je. Wacht, ja, we moeten die eruit halen. Ja, ik krijg het wel te zien. Dat is omdat je hier bij points gewoon vaste waarden hebt. Dus nu ga je bij points zeggen, dubbel puntje points. En dan worden laat view dat matchen. En verwijst dan naar de glyph contour. Dus deze punten gaan allemaal weg. En dan wordt het glyph point. Nee, exact zoals je het hier hebt geschreven. Je kunt daar gewoon dubbel klikken en dan. Ja. En dan belangrijk is het een dubbel punt voor points, want points moet eigenlijk altijd x, y, x, y, x, y zijn. Maar zo zeg je van, pakt die uit view dat we juist niet berekenen. Dus nu als je gaat kijken, krijg je de letters andersom komen. Dus dat is exact wat. Ja, wel groot. Oké. So, how do we flip them upside down? We already know because we saw before. But basically what we need to do here in point of view, and that's why do it here in small steps. Here in point of view, I can think about the way that this point, this X and Y point here, becomes something on screen. So the way that I look at it is here, I can say X, I can actually do X plus 2 multiplied by grid size. And what that does is it moves up the letter a little bit, as you can see, because it moves it up by 2 grid units. If the grid size is smaller, then it will move it farther along. And then for Y, what I can do is I could say 12 minus Y multiplied by grid size. And now I take 12, take Y, and that basically has the effect of flipping the letter around because it's basically taking the inverse of that letter. And you'll see this if you use font editors before, that they always start at the bottom and then go up, which is a thing from PostScript as well. So here, in this case, our screen starts with Y at the very top. So doing 12 minus Y actually moves it up. Why 12? Well, if I do 10, the maximum height of the letter is 10. So if I also want a space of 2 on the side, I add 2 here to move 2 unit sizes or 2 grid size units down. And now I get this view of the letter here. Yeah. It's a lot of things to take in, I think. Yeah? But also remember, the thing we're making is not easy to make. Like we're making our own editor that takes a lot of time and effort. The fact that we're already so far along means that we're actually doing quite a good job because it's not that easy if you think about it. And also, just judging by the time, we won't be able to complete this, but that's fine. Remember, we did our shape here. There's one more thing that I want to do though, and that is after our polygon, I also want to do these little dots. So the ones that you see here on the letter. And the way that I do this is I make the ideal code. I make what I want to make, which is I want to use this as a circle. And a circle in SVG takes a CX, which is the center of the circle. And then, for example, I can write 200 here. This the Y, and then I also have a R, which is the radius of that circle. So let's say 5. So that's going to draw a little circle here. As you can see, it's completely in the wrong position, but that's fine for now. And then I can also give it a class of dot, and I prepared that class to be this nice looking dot here. So this is my basic circle, but of course it doesn't work yet. But adding that or making that work is something that I can do now. Remember from our glyphs, the way that we do a list is that we use our v4 here. And we have a bunch of lists here, and one of the most interesting ones, and that's why I want to split this up, is that I have this glyph point. So I have the points of my glyph already sized to the correct position. And those correct positions, so again, looking here, mounted app dot glyph points. This is a list of every time X and Y values that are in the right position for me, right? So I want to use those values. So here I'm going to say circle v4 equals, and here I can say, well, what do I want to take out of the list? Well, I want to take out the X and Y in glyph points. And now if I just do that, it's just going to draw all of the circles, but they're all on top of each other because I don't use them for X and Y yet. So here what I can do is I can say for CX, this is managed by Vue by using the colon, basically meaning bind that to Vue. The CX equals X. That's the alias here, that's this X. So that's going to be different every time. The CY is going to be Y. So this value, the alias of that. And the radius is 5, that's going to stay 5. They're all the same size. Right? So if we refresh, we now would see the dots all on the positions of the glyph. Yeah, lots of typing. Again, remember you can copy and paste that. Although the code that I have here is a bit different on the end. And the reason why will be clear later, but that's because I also want the index of each point. And the reason why is because if I drag, I need to know which point I'm dragging. Am I dragging the first, the second, the third? Because I need to be able to change the coordinates for that point. But that comes later. What we see now normally is that we see the points, that we can also hover over them. And then if we click B or C or D, then we can actually see all of these different letters here, right? And we see the dots. And why are the dots on the same position? Well, because we calculated these positions, right? We calculated these using point of view. We use that same calculation here, and we use the same calculation for glyph contour. So this now becomes something that is very clean way of using the same calculations over and over again in multiple places. So now this becomes really powerful, because this would seem like a lot of work, but a lot of the work we already did beforehand, so we don't have to do that again. There's one more thing that I want to do, and then we need to stop, I think, is to change in the controls, change the grid size. And the way that we do that is by view, is by linking the two together. So here, this value, that's easy. So you see that the value here of the grid size, that's this thing here at the bottom, it says 50 here. How do we make it the grid size? How do we make it the actual size of the grid? We've done it a couple of times already now. If we want to make a random word here, how would we do that in, or a word that comes from the data, or like a computed thing or whatever? How do we use it? Yes, twee van die thingies. So accolades? No, accolades means something else. Brackets. So we can use here like this, and then we can type grid size. And that's just going to set that grid size to the value. In this case, it's 50, but that's just the same thing. So this is typical in HTML. Going from HTML to Vue is that we just take a static value and then replace it with something dynamic that comes from Vue. Either the data itself, like in this case, or a computed value, like we do here. I messed this up. Okay. But it doesn't change. Now we can change it. If we do mounted app.grid size and we set it to 20, for example, we can actually see everything changing. We see that this changes. We see that this changes. If we set it to 100, everything becomes super big. So it already works, only we can't actually drag the slider, or we can, but it doesn't have any effect. And in Vue, the way that we do these things with sliders and input fields, like the shop, for example, is we can also bind the two together. And what's cool is that we can bind them in two directions. So in Vue, we can both say, well, the input first, the value of that input needs to come from Vue, but also if I change it, it needs to go back to Vue. And so the way that we do that is we set it as a model. So the model is basically like a double-way connection between this slider and the actual grid size in the data. They're actually connected in two ways. And the way that we do this is we write vModel. And then because this is a number, we also need to write dot number. And then we say grid size. So this is a specific one. I also had to look it up. Actually, I had to look up everything, but this one I knew before, but the number is specific because it needs to be converted to a number. Because the grid size, of course, is not a string, it's a number here. And now what should happen is if we drag our slider, we see that our value changes, the slider changes, and then we see our grid size increasing and decreasing. Right? Just by adding this one attribute on our item here. Is this working?
Mine is still really on the bottom. I missed it.
Wat dan? Iets gedroomd? Ah nee, maar ik schrik is gewoon wat ik En maar werkt de sliders? Ja, deze is geen mobiele dingen, dus ik heb daar niet iets voor desktop. Ja, Ja, dat is ook zo. In Vue.js hebben wij die point of view. Ah ja, wacht, ik ga je laten zien wat ik dat we gedaan hebben. Dus eigenlijk, het komt op hetzelfde neer als een theme, maar de berekening is een beetje misschien logischer of zo. Ah ja. Dus so what happens here is that normally we take just x multiplied with grid size and y multiplied with grid size. But x multiplied with grid size means that if this one is 0, then it will be all the way to the side. So I do x plus 2 and then multiply it with grid size. So it moves everything 2 grid units. And then for y, because it's flipped upside down, I do, the maximum is 10, so I do 12 minus y. And so the 12 also gives me 2 units of extra margin or space. Ja. En werkt de slider bij iedereen? Dit?
Mijn puntjes staan nog niet op de... Ja, die slider wordt met de puntjes staan op de juiste gekomen. Ik heb 1 punt en dan...
Ah ja, dus als je 1 punt hebt, dat wil zeggen dat je V4 ergens een fout is.
Ja, dat is niet helemaal... Ja, het geeft geen fout.
Ja. Die V4 lijkt wel juist, maar die CX en CI staan gewoon op 200. En die moeten natuurlijk komen van de waarde zelf. Dus die kan hier allemaal exact op dezelfde plek staan. Dus je hebt inderdaad 3 punten, maar ze staan op 200. Dat is ook logisch en goed aan het systeem hoe wij Vue werkt. Als je een bepaalde waarde vast wilt hebben staan, zoals in R bijvoorbeeld, dan blijf je gewoon overal 5. Maar als je zegt dat is dynamisch, dan schaalt het. Cool. Dat ziet er goed uit. En dus die C, ja, dus wat ik dan hier heb gedaan is dat de factor x. En waarom? Omdat dat natuurlijk de waarde is die we willen gebruiken voor die punt. Yes. Proper. En dus je kunt ook switchen naar een andere letter. Ja, stop hè. Ja, en dan zie je die. Ja, en dat gaat ook niet. We'll get there. Maar die hebben we
Yeah, it's just getting out.
handle mouse down is another function. I think it's because you copied that from the final one.
It's actually not that was not, it's just the line, because on the canvas it's normal size.
Okay. So it means that, okay, so go back to your HTML vehicle. I think you have an SVG and you should set width and height is spelled wrong. So now it takes up all the space that it can. You can also disable the device toolbar in this case. Well, this is really big. You need to do Apple minus. No, you said click here first, and then you Apple minus. How does it so good? Yeah. Yeah. So you see there's a bit more work in making your own font editor. It's not something that we can do in a couple of hours, but we'll get there. So my suggestion is that we continue the lesson that we do today, because it's a lot of things and we also have the shop, and so that we want to do that we continue next week. And then also there's time to ask more questions to really understand it. If you have custom projects, that it would also be cool if you have a project in mind that you already email me or bring it next time, so we can think about, okay, how would we solve this in Vue? Yeah? Even if you just have an idea, it would be cool that you can bring this on. But I really like this approach. I know there's still a lot of complexity, but the complexity is really, the complexity that's inherent in this application, which means is we have to scale this thing, right? We have to be able to scale this, otherwise it doesn't work. We have to draw the lines of the grid. We have to have this slider at the bottom that moves this thing, and we have to have the state of which letter that we're selecting, but no more than that. If we would do this immediately in HTML and just CSS, just JavaScript without Vue, there's a lot of things that are going on, especially, for example, if we move the grid size, there's so much things that we have to think about and recalculate and think about, oh, we have to now change the value of this slider, but we also have to change this number next to it. We also have to change this SVG, so redraw the whole SVG. And now all of that, so once we've written it, all of that happens automatically because of Vue. We don't have to think about the updates anymore. Something can change in data and all the rest changes. And this is a huge, huge benefit of the approach. So that means that we can tackle more difficult projects, and that also means that the complexity rises because the things that we can do now are also more complex. That's something to keep in mind. All right. Any questions? We're a bit over time, sorry for that. Yeah. Yeah, so I think what we can do for next week is that you can bring that for your project, you can bring it along, or you can ask me the questions, or you can ask it in a minute, and then we can discuss that together. I'm going to stop the recording now because I'm